Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott, and back with me, as he was for the majority of the past 7 years, the Sundance to my Butch, and I'm the tuner to his hooch. What? The tuner? The turner to... Oh, my God. I'm very tired, people. That's a very bad sign.
You're clearly wasted already, too, on your diet 7-Up and schnapps with rum and whiskey.
I wish there was something in it right now. Have we ever started a podcast where I totally blew the intro? That's such a bad sign. Anyway, Sundance to my Butch. Oh, I can't pronounce Butch now? Wow. Yeah. And this is going to be like a million-hour podcast. That's a bad sign.
Yeah, it's more like you're the like Badger, Skinny Pete, and combo to my Mr. White. Yeah, welcome to the show.
Apparently. Oh, by the way, that's Dan talking. So, hey, Dan. Okay, I'm going to try to shake that one off. I'm going to drink some of the aforementioned Diet 7-Up, which I nearly ripped open a finger trying to open a little while ago. Anyway, so you and I, we started this podcast back in April of 2014. And back then, as many know, we were initially a Mad Men podcast. And although we knew we'd soon want to talk about more than just Mad Men, that's why we named the podcast, something that wasn't so specific to that show. But now, after all these years, and if you think of podcasting in, seasons, technically this would be our 8th season, we are finally going to cover what might be the series that both of us hold pretty much in the highest regard possible. And of course, that would be Breaking Bad. Personally, I've had it in my mind to do this since last year. I knew it was going to be a way to not only bridge the gap to stuff we're going to want to podcast about next year, but really to prepare for the eventual final season of Better Call Saul. We've covered every single episode of that show so far, so it just kind of made sense to finally combine a Breaking Bad rewatch with our podcast.
Yes, and since next year we'll spend time podcasting another show about a prideful asshole, Frasier. This is a lot show to discuss leading up to that.
I'll tell you what on the Frasier thing. I know it's a joke, but maybe it's not. Who knows? I'll tell you what. I'll say this. There's all these rumors that keep bubbling up that they actually are doing a reboot or whatever of Frasier. I don't know what that means or entails. That actually comes to pass. We can do at least one classic Frasier podcast.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah, I won't do Cheers unless I get to spend half the podcast just ripping Kirstie Alley apart. But I'll do.
Oh, that's fine.
All right, so here we are, and as I'm sure many of our listeners will remember, because we talked about it I think it was at the end of the last Loki podcast. We are not covering the show episode by episode or even 2 per episode because it would just be too many podcasts for us to break down. Never mind the fact there may be other things we want to podcast about between now and the end of the year, such as, for example, I just found out for sure within the last couple days that Why the Last Man is going to be premiering on FX on Hulu in mid-September. I don't know if that's going to be something I'm doing by myself, if I recruit one of our usual suspects or someone new or you or whatever. I'm going to probably want a podcast about that show. That might be my favorite non-superhero comic that I've ever read, or at least one of my favorites. So I'm not, and I've been wanting them to make that damn thing for like 10, 15 years now. So that might be something that's very likely to be on our podcasting agenda. But, much like Walter White wants to keep his meth pure, I think we're going to try to keep this podcast otherwise fairly pure as far as just keeping it to Breaking Bad, not talking about 18 other shows as well. Because we can do other podcasts for those shows, right?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. So let me see where we are. Oh, how we're going to do this. So I made the decision long story short, that with the exception of the first season, which obviously is only 7 episodes, our plan is to break each season in pretty much uneven halves and release a podcast every 3 weeks. And also, let me say at the top, can I say how truly and sincerely relieved I'm sure you as well, that we are that Bob Odenkirk appears to be doing well after suffering, as he said, a small heart attack on the set last week. I mean, that was a little scary.
Yeah, definitely. Everybody's pretty stressed out. I just figured it was like, heat-related death or stuff. I'm sure working in the hot sun, long days definitely doesn't help if you got a bum ticker. So, but I'm definitely glad that he got working his way through it and stuff.
Yeah,
and everybody definitely seems to be a fan of him. And, I didn't see people being douchebags about it, which they can be, but about everything because people are rich. But
we are the experts on that when it comes to people being douchebags. I prefer being a dick myself, but that's just me. It was just kind of a scary thing because it's rare that I get that distraught over the possibility of a celebrity being gravely ill or injured, but I did feel like I was a little bit beside myself, especially when we hadn't gotten any news for what seemed like an entire day. So it was a little freaky. But let's go. But we got the good news that he's going to be okay. And now the good news is we're going to get back to talking on this podcast and what we're going to do with this season, how we're likely going to handle the rest of the seasons. The good news is we are not going to be skipping over any episode. All 62 episodes are going to merit some level of conversation. Some may get only a few minutes. Some may take up half a podcast. Who knows? We kind of play loosey-goosey like that, but we're definitely covering everything. We're probably going to try, I'm probably going to try to steer away from doing full recaps of every episode because I think that might be insane. But at the same point, we may do more of a breakdown when it comes to more notable episodes. Like, perhaps the one we're going to talk about first, the very first episode of Breaking Bad. But for both time and sanity's sake, we're not going to discuss every scene in depth, and we may skip around here and there. We'll see. Again, we're kind of going to play this by ear, as they say. And
other than the Fly episode, we'll do that one like in like an 8-hour podcast just to piss off the 50 people that don't understand the episode and don't like it for some reason.
I think that goes without saying. That's probably why I wasn't going to say it. One last thing. At least for me, we are going to be doing this podcast with the understanding and the expectation that anyone listening has already watched the series. So if you're choosing to rewatch along with us, that would be awesome. You should really let us know, hey, on our Facebook page or via Twitter or Instagram, wherever else. But I'm sorry.
What? They could mail us some meth and piles of cash as like a reminder.
I wish they would just do that regardless, especially the way I've been feeling lately. But here's the thing. We cannot be concerned about spoilers as we proceed with this. And I'm just, I just saw a friend of mine she just started watching. She's like midway through the 3rd season. It's her first time she's watching it. I would love for her to listen to the podcast. I'm going to make sure if she thinks about it, it's like, you know what? You should finish the show first because I think there's going to be a lot of situations, and in fact, I can guarantee you, we're going to be pointing out aspects of early episodes that are clearly echoed or utilized, or however you want to say it, in later episodes and seasons. I mean, there are going to be things we're going to be talking about in these early episodes that come back in the last couple episodes of Breaking Bad. So, again, if for some reason you're someone who's a first-time watcher, you should probably complete the show before you listen any further. Because I refuse to hamstring myself when talking about this show, Okay, as we get started, I'll point out last that I pretty much extensively covered the back history of Breaking Bad on that countdown that we did, the greatest TV drama episodes of all time. For anyone who hasn't listened to it, and that's weird if you're listening to this podcast and you listen to that one, unless there's no Dan, fuck that. Because most people know, Ozymandias was the number 1 in that countdown. If you haven't listened to it, I urge you to go check it out. It's at stvdpodcast.podbean.com or any of the other typical podcast spots. It's number 312. It's a worthwhile listen, but it does I actually go a lot in depth over the beginnings of Breaking Bad and stuff like that. But let's start with episode number 1 here, which is not so interestingly titled. It doesn't have a title. It's just the pilot. It's such an enormously important episode. I anticipate we're probably going to spend a little bit more time on this one than the subsequent 6 here. Obviously, it was written and directed by the series creator, Vince Gilligan. And I got to say, we can talk about this a little bit from right off the top. As far as first episodes go, I would confess that Breaking Bad is actually not among the handful that first come to my mind when I think of, if there was like such a thing as like the best first episodes of all dramatic series. I'm not saying it doesn't belong in that conversation, but even though I think we all know that I believe it to be my favorite scripted continuing drama series, I don't know where it would fall on such a list, but I wouldn't have it at the top,
Yeah, no, I've never been a huge fan of the Breaking Bad pilot, or a huge fan of the series finale, for that matter. I mean, I think the finale is really good, but it's kind of overshadowed by Ozymandias. But this time around, I kind of like, as I age, even though I'm not doing it super fast, fortunately. The things that I kind of like didn't have like the most love for before, I kind of like a little bit more each time I watch them, and this
Right.
kind of was that case this time around, where like before I was just like and there's certain things that are like feel a little weird, like the way Skylar and Walt relate to each other is just it's quite different than maybe a few episodes later. It just you can just tell they're finding their footing and stuff with some things, but anyway, I've never been a huge fan of this episode, but I liked it a lot more this time for whatever reason. I don't know.
I mean, when I think of, I guess for me, when I start thinking of like, significant first episodes of series, I think of like the few that come to mind for me is like The Shield, The Sopranos. I guess you could say Lost. And if I stretched it, I could go with even the Mad Men and your favorite Game of Thrones. But it's funny how I just don't really think of Breaking Bad that way. Even if it's, I would even say the same thing about The Wire. I also don't think about The Wire in that way either. Even though they may be just as good as the ones that we just mentioned. But you're right. I'm sorry.
Whole, just like the sum exceeding the parts or whatever kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess. But I also will admit, like you kind of along the lines of what you just said, watching it again with almost new eyes, or eyes that have been checked by an eye doctor for the first time in years. And I also haven't, although while the show is on, I watched and rewatched seasons pretty consistently in between every season. I have not, and this probably will not be the first time I say this because, I'm repetitive. I have not rewatched any of this show, most of this show since it originally aired. I watched a few episodes before El Camino, and I watched a few episodes before the podcast I did a few months ago or weeks ago, whenever it was, the Ozymandias one. But other than that, so maybe I've watched like 6 or 7 of them, but that means there's 55 episodes I haven't watched again. It was just, and the pilot's actually one of them. I've not watched it since way back when. So it was very interesting to see it again. I was like, just the things I had forgotten and the things I don't know which I was more impressed by, the things I had forgotten or the things I actually remembered, because, you talk about aging, talk about me aging, I can't remember anything anymore.
Oh.
So when you get that opening, the opening of this episode, which is, Walt and his tidy whities and everything that ensues. That's one thing with this episode. That opening and that whole little framing piece of this episode, I think is probably one of the most iconic things about the episode and even the show itself. I mean, it's kind of an iconic image of Walt on the road in the desert in his tidy whities, holding that gun, and I'll say, like, when I went there was a Breaking Bad exhibit back in 2013 at New York's Museum of the Moving Image, and one of the major exhibits on display, I sent you a picture of it, was Walter White's underwear. So.
Well, yeah, you sent me a picture of you wearing them. Actually.
Well, that was, shh.
Oh, yeah.
It's not. It's not the After Dark podcast yet. Those are very special pictures. So I'm watching this opening scene, and then and I'm thinking about things while I'm watching it, like that video recording. The message he's leaving for Skylar and Walt Jr. It's interesting because it's. You start to extrapolate when you think about the series as a whole. It's like, it's kind of a little bit of an unintentional foreshadowing because they certainly didn't plan this in advance. As Vince Gilligan is famously reminds us all the time how seat of the pants they do act on this show at times, which is amazing. But it's a little foreshadowing of both that video that Walt makes in the final season, and also even kind of a little reminiscent of at least initially, the final call he makes to Skylar and Ozymandias. Not to mention the little clip that begins Ozymandias, the fake flashback of him calling her and talking to her, whatever. And even the farewell tour he does in the final episode, whatever. It's just interesting because it's constructing this whole, here, he's being emotional. He's saying what he's saying. He's also letting them know, like, don't believe everything you're going to hear about me. And it just seems, wow, it's kind of foreshadowing what's going to happen, I guess, 2 years later in his life, or is it it's actually 1 year and then 2 years later. Okay. But
it's interesting because he's coming from like a completely different place, like, here at versus later then too. I mean, still the same person, but like he's definitely like, right at this point, like he actually like, thinks he's doing it for his family. But by that point, he's just like, no, it's all about me, go fuck yourselves, take the money, but whatever.
Right. And of course, we'll talk a lot about that, probably a few months from now, but it's just interesting just hearing you say it. It's like, it's at that moment where the whole pretense of being a hero is like, no, for the people who always claim, he was a villain all along, that admission kind of does help them because like, so he was kind of doing it for himself all along. Villain. Anyway. The other iconic thing about the beginning is funny because it's a floating, flying pair of pants, which of course we will see again in that great Ozymandias episode if you're paying attention to what you see in the desert.
Yeah, this time I noticed that like that doesn't actually make sense because there's no way the pants would be landing in front of the vehicle. Like it just doesn't work with physics. There's like no way, like, even if it was super windy, which it wasn't, just, the pants can't land in front of the vehicle when he's traveling fast. But it's still a cool shot, but it just doesn't work.
Oh God, you're like this friend I have, or semi-friend I have, who started going on and on about the animated opening to all the DC movies now, where you see like, these somewhat silhouetted figures of Superman and Batman and Green Lantern, all of them doing stuff. But Wonder Woman, he keeps going on and on, but Wonder Woman, the rope shouldn't work that way. It defies the laws of physics to be better. And I'm like, it's a magic rope, right? So shut up. I know, yeah, but the pants, they're not magic.
Yeah. People that handle ropes and stuff like that, like rodeo fuckers and stuff. I mean, like, you can actually make ropes do crazy stuff. So I'm pretty sure Wonder Woman can do it if, like, some pig fucker from Wyoming can do it. Let's be honest.
Okay. Ooh. Ouch. Okay, so now we skip through the episode to the classroom. Now, this is going to be a thing we're going to be seeing throughout this first season. It's kind of fun, where Walt is teaching a lesson, but he's really cluing us in on something else. In this first time we do it, he's cluing us in on what this series, or this show, or however you want to phrase it, is actually what it's all about. Because Walt is talking about change. He's talking about transformation. And we all know that Walter White himself, he's the put-upon caterpillar that's soon going to be changing into a rather dark butterfly. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. And it's one of those things where once you're aware of it ahead of time, then it's like you listen to each time he's teaching a class and you realize there's a reason they're spending time on this. If this didn't mean something else, we wouldn't spend 2 minutes watching it. It wouldn't make sense. And that's kind of the nice little trick that they do in this very first episode. It's, he's telling us about himself and what the show is about in this lesson. So I thought that was kind of neat. And I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that, so I'll just skip to the car wash, just to mention it. What's nice about the car wash scene, and that I think that's the scene where he's forced to have to like go do the detailing and clean the cars outside because they're short people or something. We're seeing at this point, it's just one in a series of humiliations that really seem to underscore at this point in his life what a schlub he is. And for my fellow New Yorkers or the chosen people out there, Walter White, at least at this point in his life, he's very much more of a schlemazel than a schlemiel. So the more I watch this episode, the more I realize, oh my God, Walter White is a total schlemazel. He is the guy who gets the soup dumped on him.
Unless those are kinds of cheese, I have no idea what you're talking about, but go on.
As Louis De Palma once famously described on an episode of Taxi, the difference between a schlemazel and a schlemiel. A schlemiel is a guy. He's the waiter in a restaurant who trips while he's carrying a bowl of soup and it goes flying and everyone's here. The schlemazel is the guy who the soup gets dumped on. Walter White is the schlemazel. All right. And I think it's a great episode of Taxi. I think throughout he keeps giving different examples of what they are. And I keep thinking it's funny because Louis De Palma is not remotely Jewish. He keeps talking about this very Jewish thing. But you can get away with that in New York, apparently. Okay. Let's bounce over to, I think we have the scene where it's Walter White's 50th birthday celebration. I'm going to focus on something which probably didn't anticipate I was going to lead off with. That scene is an excellent way to introduce Marie. The first time we meet Marie, I was watching this and I was like, oh my God, that's Marie. At least at this point in her life in the show, that one little moment is Marie in a nutshell. To remind everybody what I'm talking about, it's the moment when Skylar is talking with Carmen, I guess she's the principal from Walt's school, and Carmen is complimenting the fact that, although Skylar is pregnant, she's really not showing. And Marie is there and she says, she's showing a little. And then later, that's the first line she has. Her next line that she has, she's kind of like going along with making fun of Hank's weight. So it's like, okay. So basically you're nasty to both your sister and your husband and about a weight kind of a thing. Okay. Now we know who you are, Marie. And of course, the scene is also it's also a nice introduction to Hank, because, initially he's really loud and brash, but as we know, for those of us who stuck with the series, which is everyone who's listening, I'm sure, Hank is one of those characters who's definitely going to evolve and transform. Hey, there it is again, as well over the course of the series, quite a bit.
Yeah, and I just to jump ahead on things, like watching this first season, I was really just impressed with like Hank, like as a person. I mean, he's definitely, he does the thing where he's kind of like a blowhard and stuff in front of other people, but but generally, like, in a more subdued setting, he's really fucking like a good solid family person, even though he's a little jokey and stuff like that. But he's actually just a super decent guy. He just kind of acts like he'll tease Nerdy White in front of Gomez and the guys, but for the most part, it's just interesting to see, like, there's a lot of layers going on with that character.
Right. If you're paying attention, absolutely, and we'll see that throughout these episodes, especially some of his moments with Walt Jr. are really indicative of that, and stuff regarding that character, as well as a few other moments. Such as during, certain intervention things. But
and one thing I noticed too is, like, in this general scene here, just like I kind of I forget that Gomez was like around since all the way back episode 1, so I thought it was kind of cool.
That's right. And also during that scene, this is the first time. Oh, by the way, I hate this. I hate going with my gag of drinking game. But if you want to pick a drinking game for this podcast, every time I point out something's the first time because it's the first season. There's a lot of first time things that are, and some are certainly more significant than others. And there are things I noted. There are things I actually did do a little bit of research on. But trust me, and so this is not. I don't know. I don't think it's that significant. But it's the first time we see Walt holding a gun. And also he's commenting on the weight of it. And it's funny, just for that moment there, it's also as you've seen the show before, so you kind of, almost everything kind of jumbles in your brain. It's almost as if, even though he hasn't even come up with the scheme yet, and for a second there, it's like, are you crafting your Clark Kent-like identity thing already here, just reacting to how heavy the gun is, whatever? It's not possible, because it's going to be a few minutes later that he becomes inspired to become, a man of meth or whatever. But, he doesn't really seem to have that problem with gun weight later on, although he does have other issues with it.
Oh.
Okay. So the next thing I'm going to point out, the hand job scene. With Skylar caring more about her eBay auction, he actually yawns at one point during it. It may be as unsexy a sexual act can be between two consenting adults as I've ever seen on any TV series or movie for that matter. It's just like, okay. I don't know how to feel about this. But again, it's a great scene in the sense that you're telling us a lot about this marriage right now and this relationship. This kind of dynamic is something that's been going on for a while. I mean, yes, we know she's pregnant, but still. And the fact that, let's be honest, it's your birthday, so I'm going to give you a hand job. Really? Really? So, I mean, if they had went with the more, let's just say the more obvious option, I would have been, all right, that's a little cliche, but okay. But actually, them going with a hand job, it points out to wow, that's all he's going to get. That's really pathetic. That's the way I felt about it, at least. So I think it's somewhere we bounce a little bit further ahead and we finally get to you can call it maybe it's the instigating incident for the entire show, whatever, I guess. Because it's when Walt finds out that he gets a diagnosis that he has cancer. I also realize that at some point around here, that Walt and I have very similar insurance concerns. We make a lot of our decisions worrying about what the insurance covers. So I said, we're kind of simpatico that way. But let me, I don't know if you'll know what the heck I'm talking about. Maybe I'm just delusional here. The scene when he's getting the diagnosis from the doctor and he's focusing on that mustard stain on the doctor's jacket, I think. This is reminding me of something, and it's been driving me crazy. And it's probably going to drive me crazy for the rest of the summer until either I remember it or someone points out to me. I mean, I just feel like there's something I watched where someone's receiving bad news from a doctor or someone like that. And the person is they're focusing on something like a stain or a stray thread or some other exceedingly minor detail as opposed to the rather dire news they're getting. It's driving me crazy. I know I've seen that somewhere else. I cannot think of where I've seen it before.
Yeah, that sounds kind of familiar, but I can't think of what it'd be right now. Maybe it's in like an old movie or something like that.
I don't know. It could be that, or it could be something fairly recent. I feel like it's some weird little thread on a shoulder or something like that. I don't know. And the other thing, a little technique they use in this scene, and they kind of come back to this to some extent with a few other moments during the show, at least in the first season specifically. There's that kind of that whistling whine that just drowns everything out. It's like a high-pitched buzzing. I think that's what the captioning says, high-pitched buzzing. It's like, all right, buzzing? All right, whatever. So I think we can skip past him quitting the car wash, although it is notable for him saying, fuck you and your eyebrows. Oh, even though I was going to mention this later, I'm just going to say it now. There is something nice about rewatching the show. Like I'm choosing to rewatch it through Netflix. I own the DVDs, but it's easier just to go bam, 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 watching it streaming, whatever. And what's nice is that the versions that are on Netflix, and this might be the case for the DVDs as well. I actually don't remember, but I'm just, for folks that were streaming out there, it's nice. They're not using the episodes that aired on AMC. They're using episodes that aired later. I think it was on IFC, because you're going to get more fucks. Because I know you remember this whole thing with the show. They were kind of given a rule where they were allowed to get away with like basically one fuck a season at some point. There were more, and there are more. Yeah. There is more than one in this season. And it's only 7 episodes.
The Blu-rays definitely have multiple F-bombs, and then like the chick that like Jesse's banging across the street from the first meth lab. Like, I'm guessing her tits weren't hanging out on the AMC broadcast. I could be wrong, but I'm just guessing.
No, they weren't.
Probably. Yeah.
Oh, is that the first time anyone said tits on this podcast? Okay, so we're keeping it classy as always. So anyway, we come to a scene where we see Walt is tossing lit matches. If I'm not mistaken, we're going to see him do that again in this series. And it's interesting to really think about what that represents or means. Or maybe it's not interesting, but I think it is. But do you know what I'm talking about? Because that's not the only time he does that.
Yeah, no, my big takeaway from the scene was like nobody, other than the time where Skylar goes into the pool, like nobody ever swims in the pool ever. Like, and I just was thinking like, well, I suppose maybe they have like to pay for like extra insurance and have somebody on there to like make sure they don't drown, stuff like that. But like nobody ever swims in the pool, like ever, other than just Skylar walking it.
I feel no one ever swims in the pool because they don't want to make their son feel bad. So that's why we never see anyone swimming in the pool.
Oh. But there's always pool toys floating around and stuff like that.
Well, that's for when people break in and when they're not home, I guess. No, I don't know. For Hank and Marie when they're house sitting for them or something.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get to it's Walt and Jesse for the first time, which it's like me and you meeting for the first time. And what's funny about that, and obviously, yes, he had seen Jesse earlier during the when they're doing the raid, and the scene you actually just mentioned, we see them going out the window, and we actually see, oh my god, there's nudity, because I was like, wow, nudity on Breaking Bad I don't remember that. But the thing I wanted to point out here, and we're going to have the first of a couple special moments on the podcast, is I had almost forgotten, because, like I said, it's been a long time since I've rewatched this pilot, that their entire initial relationship, their partnership, or however you want to phrase it, I should say, it's totally built on the threat of Walt turning him in. So, here, check it out.
DEA took all your money, your lab. You got nothing. Square one. But you know the business. And I know the chemistry. I'm thinking maybe you and I could partner up.
You want to cook crystal meth? You and me.
That's right.
Wow.
Either that, or I turn you in.
Oh, by the way, P.S. It's not going to be like a clip-laden show or anything like that, but I did it for the Mad Men episode that we did a few months ago. So, if possible, I'll try to add a clip or two to each of these Breaking Bad podcasts just to kind of spice things up, if I can find short ones like that one. Anyway, there is a bit where they actually reference the title. And, of course, that credit goes to Jesse. again, I kind of this I did remember. I always kind of remember. Oh yeah, isn't it Jesse who actually says something that uses the phrase "Breaking Bad"? And that's the one time it's mentioned, and it's used as a title for the show. And I think he says something like, some straight like you with a stick up his ass, or a giant stick up his ass, or something. All of a sudden, you're 60 and you're gonna just break bad. And I'm going, oh yeah, so Jesse's responsible for the title of the show. That's kind of interesting. I thought so. Yeah, Scott, that's very interesting. Anyway. So the other thing, before we get to the more fun stuff in the episode, when Walt is messing with those punks in the clothing store, the guys that were like mocking his son, I don't know if I want to call it a first exactly, but to a certain extent, it's okay. It's not the first time we see his temper flare up, because I guess technically when he quits his job and, the fuck you and your eyebrows, that would be the first time. And when he pathetically knocks the stuff off the counter or whatever. But here is where he's really being violent.
Yeah, and the two scenes, they're different too. And just like the thing at the car wash is more of just like a overreaction to the fact that he's got fucking cancer. But I think this is definitely one of the first signs of maybe he's being a good dad, but I also get the fact that there's an element of just embarrassment and pride there too. So he's kicking that ass, but it's not just about Walt Jr., which of course, you name your kid after yourself if you're a fucking narcissist anyway. So there's that, but apologies to David Gott Jr. or whatever the hell who's listening to this podcast, but still.
Oh man. Okay. Oh lordy. Yeah, I have an excuse. I'm operating on an hour's sleep for the last 40 hours.
It's the thing. It's just a classic thing, If you name your kid with the exact same name as you, you're not doing that to be humble,
No.
So
I'm not denying that. I would say the way I would look at it is he views his son as an extension of himself, and and on top of that, the fact that his son is afflicted with what he has, it kind of goes to what you were. I think you were kind of sort of saying this. Walt's own sense of constant, the thing I mentioned earlier, humiliations, mortifications, whatever, about being trodden upon. And as he sees people doing that to his son, it's just like it's happening to him, because that's what Walt's life really is. He suffers indignities. And now we're starting to see it being set off. I know in Walt's mind, it's just like what happens with his character. He believes he's doing this to stick up for his family, to protect his family, to be that. But as we know, that's his running line until it's not. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, with a lot more context and stuff, it really made me rethink this scene this time around. I'm still glad that he did it. Those punks deserve to get their ass beat, and I'm not sure why he went out and all the way around and then came in the front door, other than to make it look cool.
I was wondering that. It's like, did you not want them to know that you were there? Are you making an entrance?
Yeah, so it goes into a mall or something, then goes out a mall entrance, and then comes in the front door and just knock this fucker out. So it's still cool.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out the logistics of that. It's like, wait, did you have to run around to get there? Because I don't know. Anyway, so let's just skipping around the little things that we see as Walt and Jesse are off in the deserts and whatever. Oh, I would be remiss if I didn't mention it's around this point in the episode where we get one of the I will even go as far as the legendary funny lines from Jesse when he refers to the cow house. It's one of those that I talk about whenever I talk about different movies or more TV shows, and there's those moments where the writers are just tickled pink with the joke they came up with, cow house, and Walt's reaction to him. But what's great about a moment like that, and we'll get a few others during the course of the next few episodes, thankfully I will add, is it's a nice little bit of levity in a situation which doesn't really have a lot. it's kind of it's a nice little. There's something very comical about the pairing of Walt and Jesse. There always has been, and I just like when they get to have a little moment like that.
Yeah.
So okay. Oh, also should mention because what Jesse's trying to do as far it involves Crazy Eights. We do get to meet Crazy Eight in this episode. And for those folks who watched not just Breaking Bad, but then Better Call Saul, you know you're going to see him again in the future / past, whatever. So kind of significant. I'll going back to things I forgot about, and we're also going to Walt being on the road and whatever with that gun. I forgot Walt tried to kill himself.
Oh yeah, I totally forgot he pulled the trigger there. I was shocked that I'd forgotten that. So I really, yeah. How do we forget that?
How do you forget that your main character initially tries to kill himself and then it doesn't work? Which of course is again comical. That goes to like Trading Places and Dan Aykroyd putting the gun to his head and it doesn't go off, and then he throws it and it goes off or something like that. I do like the fact that his whole confusion, because he thinks it's police sirens that are approaching, and it turns out to be fire trucks that are just blowing past him, to deal with the fire that they had left behind, whatever. I'm going to make a silly connection here. It's funny. This first episode is about, and he mistakes these fire trucks, whatever. And at the end of Ozymandias, where does the story end up? Before he leaves, at a fire station. Maybe could even be the fire station where these trucks came from. Who knows?
I definitely do think it's odd that all the fire trucks just blow by this guy standing in the desert next to a crashed RV with his pants off, and that probably should have came up in their investigation later, when they're out there, finding the mask and stuff like that. I mean, somebody should have talked to the fire department, about this, because they clearly went out there to deal with the fire, but I think they just kind of forgot that thread. But that is a big deal. But
I think it is a big deal because if they saw that there was evidence of a fire, which they do, wouldn't they have checked to see? See, I wonder if they just assumed that, there's evidence of fire here, but it didn't occur to them that someone would have come out there and put it out, professionally. Yeah. That's the only excuse for that, because otherwise you would have talked to the fire department who came out there, whatever. But maybe I'm thinking they just didn't. It didn't occur to them that's how it was put out by an actual fire crew.
And I think they're on the res there too, so maybe they just didn't bother to connect the dots or deal with whatever red tape they'd have to go through to see who worked on the fire or whatever. But another thing too, there's a firefighter hanging on the back of the fire truck. You wouldn't ride on the back of a fire truck while driving through the desert. You get so much dirt and crap gets pulled up around the back of your vehicle. That person will be absolutely just covered in stuff. It's just what happens when you drive through that kind of terrain. So there's just nobody would do that ever.
Okay. The other thing of significance that needs to be one of the things that I would point out as we're getting near the end of this episode that I don't want to forget about here. Also, as far as things I want to keep track of personally, and maybe people following along with the podcast, you can do this too. It's fun and games you can do at home, kids. Hey, let's keep track of how many times Jesse gets beaten up over the course of this series. This would be the first time when Crazy Eight beats the crap out of him. There's going to be these things that this is a common trope of Breaking Bad. This is a common theme of Breaking Bad. This is a running gag of Breaking Bad. So we're in the first season. We're going to be seeing, like I said, the first of many of these things. As we get to the end of the episode, or at the end of the episode, it's Walt in bed with Skylar. And again, it's when you've watched the entire series, it makes these early moments have a certain either resonance or dissonance, depending how you're looking at them, with what we know is how this is going to change. Because the way they are in bed with each other here, just think of the way they are a few seasons from now when it's kind of frightening,
Yeah.
It's look, they're still kind of horny and love people here, sort of, and even though that's not what he's really thinking, but we're going to get to that. I'm going to get to that a little bit when we talk about a different episode. but we know how he's going to get later on.
Yeah, I also liked in the breakfast scene how like the hot water or the water heater, because you don't say hot water heater, but the water heater is already like working like crap way all the way back in
Yes,
season 1.
it's already being referenced, and we know where that. Yes, it's going to lead to something.
Yeah, I really like that. That's just cool because we like the crawl space episode and the fact that he works on it for a good chunk of that season, stuff, whatever. But it's really cool that like it's a thread that goes like through the whole show pretty much.
Absolutely, I'm glad you brought that up. I had forgotten about that. That's a good one. Let me I'll just throw a few things out there. I'll wrapping up the first episode. I call them a few bits of trivia that I've looked up so that you guys won't have to. But they're just kind of fun if you want to check them out. If you actually pay attention to those quick little opening titles of Breaking Bad for every episode, a lot of those things you're seeing that are flashing by you, it's the actual formula and molecular weight of methamphetamine. So that's what that is if you watch it, you'll see that. However, it's funny. There's also a mistake in season 1. When one of the supposed chemical elements that we see in those opening titles, I think it's CH or something, actually doesn't exist. They removed that by season 2. Interesting. I'm going back to those underwear that we talked about earlier. And this I'm going to quote, and I will say right now, this is, I think did I take this out of, I think I took this one out of IMDb. I'm pretty sure I must have. That apparently Bryan Cranston had impressed Vince Gilligan with the total lack of vanity he brought to playing Walter White from the very first day they started filming. He made 2 major contributions in that pilot. It was Cranston's idea that Walt should be wearing very faded, stained, which explains what I saw in the exhibit, unflattering white jockey shorts. And maybe even more significant than that, because that's just the one episode, he's the one, Cranston, who wanted Walt to have like this very thin, almost pathetic mustache, which he does have for a while, actually. And Cranston's explanation for that, he explains both things, actually. He figured Walt was so miserable that even his underwear would be pathetic. But the mustache, he felt it would highlight the pointlessness of his entire life. Because there's really no point in even having a mustache if it's going to be that wispy and embarrassing. Oh, that mustache. Oh, and the other thing to note, just since we're going to be talking about the entire series and how there's a certain nice symmetry to everything here, when Walt is told by the doctor that he gets his cancer diagnosis. Now, bear in mind, he essentially gets his cancer diagnosis on his birthday, or right around there. He's told by the doctor that in the best case scenario, he only has 2 years to live. And what happens in 2 years? Spoiler. Walt dies. Pretty much on his birthday. The doctor says you got 2 years. He ends up exactly having 2 years. I think that's pretty amazing the more I think about it. So they really did call their shot in the very first episode. Oh, man.
That's cool.
Oh, one other silly thing I'm going to, and, you could chalk it up to, me and I've got an ego probably similar to Walter White's at times. I'm going to be occasionally referencing a list, blog, whatever you want to call it, that I wrote many years ago. You know the one I'm talking about, Dan. My top, I think it's my top 25 greatest Breaking Bad episodes of all time. I kept going over to it to see what episodes would pop up on it. The pilot, and I think it's more for its historic significance more than anything else, actually is number 4 on my list. So. And I'll tell people at the end of the podcast how they can find that list, even though I've probably posted it on our Facebook page 8,000 times over the years. All right. I think we should move on to the next episode.
Yeah, there's one line that I like from the episode is when Walt corrects Hank and Gomi about like what kind of gas is going to be created in the meth lab, and he just says phosphine gas, like he says it with like authority because he knows the answer. Then he kind of walks it back a little bit, so he says phosphine gas. I think, and it's funny, but it's also kind of like, you just kind of like think like why exactly he feels to like the need to like make himself look less smart if he's just doing it because Hank's around, or if he's also doing it to like show that he doesn't like like he's trying to act kind of clueless about the mess stuff. I think it's a little bit of both, but
it is. But it's also, but what's funny about that is as we watch future moments like that, how it's harder and harder for him to restrain his arrogance in these moments.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
we know that's going to come. And well, I don't. You know what? I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because I know the episode I want to go. We're going to be talking about that, and we're not up to it yet because we're up to episode number 2. Episode number 2, which was titled "Cats in the Bag," and it was directed by Adam Bernstein. Point that out because beyond directing some of the most iconic music videos of all time, Adam Bernstein has covered both comedies and dramas throughout his directing career. He's a real standout when it comes to television. He's directed things like Oz, 30 Rock, Scrubs, Fargo, Better Call Saul, and 7 other episodes of Breaking Bad. You don't really get a more diverse and really impressive list of TV directing credits than Adam Bernstein has. He's like upper tier type of dude. And also means if he wrote 7 others, the other 6 times he's the director, I don't need to go through all that again. So that's how I say it now. And of course, the episode was once again written by Vince Gilligan. Now, as I know Dan knows full well, the title of this episode, The Cat's in the Bag, along with the title of the next one, which will be And the Bag's in the River, is actually splitting up a film quote from Sweet Smell of Success, which is pretty much one of the sharpest and edgiest dialogue-packed screenplays of its time, maybe of any time. And, of course, that is actually a script that was written by the legendary Clifford Odets. And if you don't know who that is, that's okay. I understand you're all millennials or wannabes out there. I suggest you Google that man and learn all about him. Because there's a guy, if there hasn't been a movie about him yet, there should be. And something more than all the... Actually, they make a lot of winks to him that are sprinkled throughout the Coen Brothers movie, Barton Fink, actually. But really interesting. And if I'm not mistaken, Dan, just because I'm going to be throwing in personal things throughout these podcasts, didn't you, whether it was for Christmas or my birthday, aren't you the one who bought me Sweet Smell of Success?
Yeah, I think I'm the one that got you the criterion of that at some point. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was actually when you actually used to buy me presents, but you don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I change it up. Like like I don't get everybody everything every year, but like next year I'll get something for God. Like the following year I'll get something for Colleen, and I just kind of spread it around a little bit.
I see. Yeah. So I haven't got anything for five years.
Regardless, fuck you, Ranch. No, for you.
All right. So the second episode picks up, I would say, 5 to. I'm going to give him a little credit here. I'm going to say it picks up maybe 5 to 10 minutes later. So it's literally finishing up what Walt started in bed with Skyler, and I won't get into what I think he was actually doing. We'll just assume it was somewhat conventional sex and not what I kind of want to say because I'm trying to be a bit of a better person here. Now, it's interesting with these, as we go into the second episode, we're technically telling a lot of story through an extended flashback. It's not really a device that ends up being used excessively on Breaking Bad, although, if memory serves, many episodes do begin with some sort of cryptic flash forward. It's some odd piece of business that will eventually build up to over the course of the episode. One can say they actually play that long game throughout the next season, and it's also a device that I believe Better Call Saul ended up adopting as well. And I'm not even talking about all the Gene scenes that open every season of that series. But the fact that we're going back like, 5 hours earlier or 2 days earlier, whatever. It's a rather uncommon thing for them to do that. That's not generally what they do on Breaking Bad. But, I guess it's just how they had to build out the foundation of what they were laying in these early episodes. So, with that said, let me bounce to the next classroom discussion. Because I had mentioned before how the classroom discussions are really kind of basically telling us something other than what they're actually about. Classroom discussion is Walt talking to his students about chirals. These are things that are the mirror images of one another, but although they may somewhat look the same, not somewhat, they may look the same, they don't necessarily act the same. And, he goes active, inactive, good, bad. And once again, his lesson is a parallel once again for himself and the duality his life is starting to now undertake, and we're going to see it increase over the course of the rest of the series, because as he continues to break bad even further, and we know that we're going to encounter the quote-unquote other persona of his later in the series, so that falls under there's your mirror image, but he's, good, bad. So I kind of enjoyed that. I picked up on that quickly. And one last thing about the high school. What kind of spectacular funding does this high school have? I went to one of the top math and science schools in the country here in New York City, and I will tell you, we didn't have 1/10 as much lab equipment as this place apparently seems to have. I am astonished by that. But anyway.
I don't know. I think New Mexico's got all that scientific history with the Los Alamos and stuff like that, so maybe they get extra grant money or something because of it, because that kind of thing.
Maybe, but I don't believe it. No. Anyway, so when I really like the scene, I think it's essentially when it's Walt and Jesse, and they're trying to decide by a coin flip who is going to take care of the body and who's going to take care of who in the basement. And again, I've already said I'm not recapping the episodes. I assume you all know what happened, because you watched the show. You know that Walt gassed them in the RV, and one is dead and one is not, and so on and so forth. I'm not filling in those blanks for you because you watched the show already. But what I wanted to point out in this scene, it's really, for me, or I think for all of us, it's the first instance of really seeing the depth and emotional weight of Aaron Paul's performance as Jesse. And we're only midway through the second episode at this point, but it's really impressive. If you remember the scene and the way he reacts and the things he says, it's just ooh. To me, it's Aaron Paul's first moment on the show. I mean, obviously, he's going to have much bigger ones, but it's something where if you weren't thinking much of his performance before that, that's the moment that makes you go, oh, there's something more going on here. And it really makes it kind of hard to fathom that there was even a possibility that he was originally intended to be killed off.
Yeah.
But, there's more to say about that later on. So I won't get into the stuff of, Hollywood legends. Did that really happen? I kind of doubt it. There's actually an entire, true story about that whole situation. So I'll get to, but I want to get to that much later.
Yeah. Definitely seems like, the more time they were able to spend with him, the more they're able to see he was a revelation, I think is what they usually say when they discover somebody's really awesome and skilled and this kind of thing. Right. He definitely, he's so freaking young here too. I mean, just, this is all ago. So, just compare how he looks here now, compared to, recent stuff, when he's in overrated crap like Westworld with no depth or substance. At least there's good actors in it, like Aaron Paul.
Right, and which is why I even bothered to watch it. Okay, so
I still pulled.
All right, so back to the episode of the show that we do want to talk about. I also love, again, one of the great things about a show like Breaking Bad, which again is a show I think does it possibly more than any other show that I can think of. If there's one I'm forgetting, and I'm thinking, I can think, Mad Men is a great show, but they don't really do this. Sopranos was a great show, do it a little bit, not as much, and so on and so forth. The fact that they can have a moment, especially something that can be rather dire and serious and whatever, and then they can throw it some sort of odd gag that just kind of punctures it just a little bit. And what I'm thinking of is, you got Crazy 8 in the basement. And, and he's basically with the bicycle locked around his neck, he's chained to the pole, whatever. When Walt, off screen, starts sliding things over to him, like the sandwich or whatever. The sliding of the bucket and then the rolling of the TP is a pretty great and pretty unexpected gag. I really loved it because there's been how many things. I know someone had this thought. How many times have you watched things over the years, pre-Breaking Bad and this especially, where someone is being held prisoner or whatever, and it seems like we don't even think about the fact, but what about the bathroom? Sometimes they may have a thing where the person has to take them to the bathroom back and forth or something like that. But generally speaking, it's kind of just, we're just going to pretend it doesn't happen. I love that they went there.
Yeah, it's funny because it's always been kind of like a joke, and they like to, people like to joke about, 24, he's never taken a piss or anything,
right?
Star Trek, there's like no bathroom on the bridge and stuff, but it's cool that they actually take the time to do that because, it's realistic.
No,
I like that.
And it's things like that I really appreciate it on a show like Breaking Bad, and whenever any show should do that, but they're just the ones I think of first, where they will take the time to show us something or do something that other shows won't, and we either be something that's funny like a gag like this, or something that just becomes a lot more interesting than you would anticipate it, like actually doing something and putting something together. It's a running thing from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. It's like, oh no, that's a fun bit of business. We should I do want to see that. At some point, a little bit later on, here's another first. Even though it doesn't happen too many times, but it happens enough, and some more memorable than others. We get our first Skyler and Jesse meeting, which I believe is when he's in the process of dragging the body back into the house, and that's where she shows up, because she wants him to stop selling marijuana to her husband. And I was like, and just the looks on their faces, whatever, and especially his face, whatever. I was going, oh, okay. I knew that they interacted. I didn't forget that. It's one of those things like, oh, it's like the middle of the second episode. I didn't realize it was that quick.
Yeah. It's super funny, and they're both so awkward, and what they're doing. I mean, it's just, she's trying to be all tough and whatever, and clearly just isn't. And he's just super freaking worried because Walt's pretty much blackmailing him, whatever, almost in a way. So he doesn't know what the hell's going on, and it's a funny scene. It's just
yeah, absolutely, and as our beautiful clip that we played earlier, the fact that their entire Walt and Jesse's relationship is built upon a threat to begin with. It's one of those things that I had forgotten, but to know that makes their entire relationship that much more interesting as we go on. Because the fact is, it's how you always talk about something is built on a lie or built on this. It's like, no, this is built on a threat. And it's funny. It starts off with a threat, and once again, where do we go with eventually with this thing? It's like it goes from being built on a threat to, well, kind of like threatening your life or actually trying to kill you, and stuff. Yeah. So there you go.
Oh, and speaking of Skyler and Jesse's interaction, I really like Skyler researching him online and reading his whatever their version of MySpace page is, and it's just funny because they mentioned Twat Hammer in there. They mentioned how much he likes MILFs, which of course we saw in the last episode when he was plowing one. And how his phone number, of course, his phone number has a 69 in it. And it's like, there's no way somebody, a person like that wouldn't, if he could pick his own phone number, wouldn't have fucking 69 in it. It's perfect. It's funny. And I like that they have the attention and detail to just do the stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. It's so spot on. And it's just, really great. It's gags like that really make this such a great show. Because, again, people talk about how serious a show and how intense a show that Breaking Bad is, and it is all those things. But what makes it a truly spectacular show is in combination with those things. It can be a really funny show, whether it be in the details or in the dialogue or in the performances, and we're going to see that time and time and time again. And in this episode, I have to say, the gag of all gags that maybe makes you want to gag are the results of what happens when you try to dissolve a body with acid in a bathtub. So once again, for Walt, there's always time for a science lesson, kids. And what did we learn? That's something you don't do.
Nope.
And finally, at the end of the episode, there's something about this show, and we've referenced Breaking Bad obviously a number of times when we would talk about Better Call Saul. One of the things I think both of us, not I think, I know both of us adore about Better Call Saul is there are any number of striking images, shots. I mean, the cinematography on both these shows, and they're obviously, probably similar or the same exact crews, whatever, pretty much stands out from almost anything else on television, past or present, and I think in both our opinions, whatever. But it's not, and I don't just mean, oh, that's a pretty landscape or something like that. It's more than just that. And the image at the end of this episode that we're left with of this little girl finding and wearing the gas mask, there's something so really evocative about that. In so many ways. And it's one of those things, the more I think about it, the more I start thinking about, just how children are used throughout this show at certain points, and how you're kind of like, the innocence of a child with something that represents something so dangerous and insidious, just bumped into my microphone. That way. If one wants to call it poetic, yeah, you could go that route too, I suppose. I just really, it struck me enough to want to write something down about it, and so I thought it was worth mentioning.
I am a little bothered about the kids playing kickball in the desert, though, because there's like cactuses and like other sharp things all over the place, and like snakes and stuff, and like especially the native kids, if they're like living out there, or whatever. Like you aren't going to do that in like the middle of the desert. It's just going to get stuck on stuff. It's going to get popped. There's crap all over the place. It's hot. This isn't a place where you're going to randomly kick a ball.
Nah. See, I think that's part of the hazards. So that's what. That's what they have, because it's just like kids who play kickball in the streets of New York while cars are whizzing by and kids are getting run over 20 times a day. So it's not much worse. Anyway, you're right. Okay, so see, I told you we can get we get to these other ones a little bit quicker, because now we can get right to the next episode, number 3 on the list, which is, as I said, the title is "And the Bag's in the River." I don't got to go through who directed and wrote it, because it's the same ones as the previous episode. Now we do something else different as far as using time in the beginning of an episode. Because as we see Walt and Jesse, they're kind of mired in cleaning up that bloody slog of human pulp, we start intercutting to a flashback of Walt's early years. And he's with Gretchen. I guess you could say, oh, it's the first time we meet Gretchen. Who cares? As they break down the elements that make up the human body. And of course we're going to find out at the end that that little percentage that's left over was the human soul. I actually wrote my note, because I hadn't watched this episode in a long time. It's like, I wrote my note like, what's left is the human soul. Is that what it's going to be? I can't remember if they either say that on the show or some other show once said that once or whatever. It feels right, yet it feels cliche at the same time. But if it's Gretchen who says it, that's just perfect, because she would say something like that. Oh, trivia note about Gretchen and that actress, Jessica Hecht. I guess most people know her more from Friends and Breaking Bad, maybe. She's actually married to the director, Adam Bernstein. So I'm going to guess that might be how she got the gig. Just saying. So... Oh, and one little thing. So after they've cleaned up, they've been cleaning up all the pulp, and then they go outside and they're hosing each other down in their little kiddie pools. Did you kind of get a little bit of a Pulp Fiction vibe a little bit going on there? Did it remind you of that just a little bit? I mean, obviously they don't hold each other off, but it still kind of felt that way. You know what I'm saying?
I've only seen Pulp Fiction once, and it's been like 20 years or something. So I don't know. I'm sorry.
Never mind. Anyway. Well, I'm saying, you know what?
Crocodile Loki's got a sweet kiddie pool to hang out in, so there's that.
Yeah. Okay, well, just imagine that from this point on, I'm saying things rhetorically for our listeners instead. I don't know.
Yes.
So, as the episode progresses, Crazy 8, or we can call him Domingo if you like, which means Sunday, he really starts to get into Walt's head about Jesse. And laying seeds of doubt about Jesse, guess what? That's going to be a common theme throughout Breaking Bad. people who try to lay seeds of doubt and sow discontent in Walt's mind, trying to take advantage of any little paranoid tendencies Walt has about Jesse. We're going to see that multiple times in this series. But what that leads to, again, the show, it could just be intensely serious, but instead we get a practically slapsticky fight between Walt and Jesse in the bathroom. It's such a pathetic fight.
Uh-huh.
After they're like, I just did something to we're on a video cast instead of an audio cast. I wave my arms frantically, like it would be. Hey, you'll like this. It would be the way Niles and Frasier might have a fight with each other.
That's totally. Yep.
And what I love about it is, again, the series defying convention and expectation. It's so silly. And I also will always remember from this episode, we should never forget that a coin flip is sacred. The way that Jesse says that with such oomph, it's like, no, how can you not know this? A coin flip, it's sacred. I just love that. It was one of those things. I was like that. If I was going to come up with like a more obscure Breaking Bad reference T-shirt, I think that might be one of my ideas. A coin flip is sacred, and people are like, "Oh, that's interesting." They wouldn't know I'm referencing Breaking Bad. We got a couple first times in this episode. First time we see Marie is a thief. That's kind of important because that's going to play a part throughout this episode. We're going to get that bit with the spoons later on. And I think although I don't know if I would call her a MILF because I don't know who would fall into the LF category for it. It is the first time we meet Wendy the crack whore. And I guess that's the scene that one of the things we were talking about earlier, when Hank takes Walt Jr. to the motel parking lot, kind of doing a slightly scared straight kind of routine with the kid. And that moment is kind of fun, and it is showing that Hank cares, and he's kind of being kind of like, the second father. But the thing I really liked that Hank did, and it goes directly to what you were saying earlier, is Hank's reaction to Marie when she asks him to do that. Because he realizes, like, that's not cool that he's going to be stepping on the kid's father's toes. This is something his dad should be doing, not him. Does Walt need... Because in a way, even if Walt never becomes aware of it, we realize Hank's not just that brash, loud guy. He's at least somewhat cognizant of the fact that maybe Walt doesn't need to be emasculated once again, which this would essentially be doing. So that goes to what... It's little things like that you almost forget about until you're watching it. Like, oh yeah, there's those layers you were talking about. Something like that. I really enjoyed little moments like that. I really enjoyed. So back to the the basement of horrors here. But I love that Walt wants Crazy 8, or like I said, Domingo. He wants him to sell him on a good reason not to kill him. And we end up with a moment I really enjoyed. I've had conversations with people where, for some reason, even though I seem to have forgotten, pretty much 90% of what I experienced in the 90s, and I didn't even do drugs. I don't know why that's happening to me right now. But I will still remember a weird local bank jingle I heard in 1981 while listening to a Yankee game on AM radio or something. And they have Walt and Crazy 8 have a moment like that when they're talking about Crazy 8's family, his dad, how he owns a furniture store, Tampico. and they kind of go through the entire jingle together. There's something really just so lovely about that moment when he's like, Don't let shopping strain your brain, oh, just sing this short refrain, oh. Just a part where they kind of go, they try to remember, our furniture is bueno. Tampico is the name of. It's such a really nice little piece of business. I just enjoyed that so much.
I remember the first time I watched that episode, like my takeaway from that was just like the address of the furniture store is like a block or two from like a comic shop that I stopped in Albuquerque the first time.
Of course. Oh my Lord. So, right. Oh, I just did that right into the mic. So, shortly after that, Crazy kind of reiterates that maybe that this line of work doesn't seem to suit Walt, that maybe he should get out before it's too late. And I mentioned that because it's interesting. I had the thought here, with this overall experience, which culminates in what happens in this basement, of course, and what he ends up doing, whatever. Would this represent the first time Walt could have decided to stop, but pressed on? Or do we really think that's more of an issue after he's in remission or hits a certain total later on? I mean, I'm not saying it goes on my list of times, because that's just more of just how I choose to interpret it. But that's how I kind of felt about it. Like, here's your first opportunity. It's like, okay, maybe this, especially after what we just went through, maybe this isn't such a great idea after all. I seem to have gotten away with this. Maybe I shouldn't do this. And I think maybe he does think that for like a hot minute and then goes right back to it,
Right. Yeah, there's definitely, moments where he had, crossroads that he, comes up to and just keeps on plowing through.
So one of the things I really loved about how they handled this situation between Walt and Crazy 8, it's that plate reveal and Walt's reaction to it. I think it's just one more thing that really elevates the series. Because the terror that Walt has, it's not simply because the realization that Crazy 8 must have taken a dangerous-looking shard of the plate. No. It's the horrible realization that despite all their bonding and all the reasons that Walt had on that left side of that legal pad. Oh, by the way, how many of us over the years have done our own pros and cons list for some big life thing? We've done that. That's essentially what he did there. But
yeah, the fact that he's doing it on sitting on the toilet with his pants down is just like perfect characterization for this character. I mean, between that and when they're in the kiddie pools and Jesse deliberately shoots the hose at his dick right away. It's just they know how to show these characters the way they should be, and they just do it consistently every fucking time.
Also, it's interesting to point out that in a subsequent episode, Jesse will say that after essentially flushing down two humans down his toilet, how could he ever take a crap in that house ever again? They've already flushed one of those humans. Walt doesn't have that problem. He doesn't mind adding a little bit to that stew in the pipes. Oh, boy. So, yeah, it's that horrible realization that he's going to have to kill him. And interesting, as we keep comparing what we see in these early episodes to what we're going to see as the seasons progress, it's comparing Walt's remorse here, before he's even done it, to all the subsequent deaths he's going to be responsible for. Because we're going to see this become less and less of an issue with him as the series progresses.
Yeah, this one, he really doesn't want to do it. And there's also an element of he's lost control of the situation. He doesn't want to do it, but now his hand is forced, and he doesn't like the fact that he's lost the control, even though the situation is in a way out of control. But now he has to do this. He's completely boxed into a corner, and he has to do this. And I get that he doesn't like the fact that he has to do that. Based on that as well. Exactly,
because there's something he says later in a later episode. Which is appreciative. It's a little on the nose, but I don't mind it because of the setting, so it pretty much works. The fact that Walt wants to have choices, he wants to be able to have choices and make choices. which would mean he has control of his life, of his situation. When he's in a situation where the choice is taken away from him and he's forced to do something, which has been kind of a theme for his life, he's been forced into these situations, whatever, then it's upsetting, it's discombobulated, whatever. And that's what happened here. He had sussed the situation and he had made a decision. And now he realized, no, I can't do that. I have to do this. I don't want to do this, but I don't have a choice. I do love the fact that we'll then at some point later get the reveal that Domingo was actually a snitch, or crazy head, I should say. And of course, I'm sure as all of our listeners already know, it's great that we are actually going to see the origin of that 13 years later on Better Call Saul.
Oh yeah, because have we seen him get flipped yet? I can't remember.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
It's when since it's a Better Call Saul, I don't mind talking about it. It's Nacho gets Jimmy to represent him. And he makes the deal with Hank. So that's when we bring Hank into Better Call Saul. So there's a spoiler for that one too. Sorry guys. Anyway, I'm sure you all watched that too.
Yeah.
So something else I forgot about. And in fact, it goes to what we were just talking about Walt choices, decisions, his life, and so on. After all this is said and done, we have this moment where we just see Walt on the bridge. He's in his car, he's parked like in the middle of the bridge. All the traffic's going, below him in different directions, whatever. And you see that he's contemplating. He's contemplating what? His next move, the remainder of his life, the decisions that he's made or that will continue to make. And this is, after some conflict that he's been having with Skylar, who knows that he's been lying about things, about him coming home late and so on and so forth. When the episode ends with him saying, I have something I need to tell you. And that was... Exactly. That's how the episode ends. By the way, that list of mine, this episode came in number 25. On my top 25 Breaking Bad episodes of all time. You can find that on... No, I'm just kidding. I'll give you that later because I know no one cares. I would like to move on to the next episode. So, yes, Scott, go ahead. All right, that's what I'll do.
Yep, I'm good. Yep.
So, the next episode, interesting one. Next episode is Cancer Man. Now, that was directed by Jim McKay, who, like Adam Bernstein, has a pretty extensive and impressive list of TV credits under his belt. An episode of The Wire here, a couple Rectify episodes, and pretty much numerous episodes of just about every show ever done by the Kings. I'm talking Good Wife, Good Fight, Evil, Brain Dead. Well, that's pretty much all the shows done by the Kings. And he also did a few episodes of Better Call Saul. It's actually the most noteworthy thing beyond, there's some good stuff here, is that he only did one Breaking Bad episode. That's actually the more interesting thing about that. And again, the episode was written by Vince Gilligan. I should point out that the first 4 episodes are all Vince Gilligan, and then the subsequent 3, even though most likely they're still mostly him, but he did collaborate with another writer on each of the last 3. But we'll obviously be getting to those when we get to those episodes.
And then the title of this episode's an X-Files nod, since that's where Gilligan came from. I just called him Billigan, so it's not a bad name.
Right. Yeah. The Cancer Man is totally a reference. I mean, obviously, beyond on the surface, it's a reference to Walter White and his cancer. Yeah. It's a wink and a nod to the X-Files, because as you were pointing out, Vince Gilligan, of course, not to mention Gilligan was a writer on X-Files, but then Cranston, Aaron Paul, and Dean Norris were all on the X-Files at one time or another. Anna Gunn, however, was not ever on the X-Files. But you might appreciate this, Dan. Her very first on-screen job, first one, was a very small part on Quantum Leap.
Oh, nice.
Thought you liked that. With this episode, it's interesting. There are some, as I gather, when I was looking up stuff about these episodes. There were some that felt this episode was a little bit of a letdown. They're wrong. But most others felt it was giving the viewers, I would say, a chance to catch their breath. You know, we're putting the pieces back on the board. We're resetting the story, and we're deepening not just the characters, but the actual world building that this entire season is really devoted to, I would say. Flipping back to, since we mentioned X-Files and I threw in the Quantum Leap thing, I have to say this. Because, you know, it's sci-fi, and, you know, it's not a sci-fi show. And while it might not be a specific X-Files reference, I personally feel obligated to point out that at one point in this episode, we see Walt Jr. and Walt watching Earth versus the Flying Saucers, which is a sci-fi flick from the 1950s. And it was driving me crazy because I saw what they were watching. I was trying to figure it out, and I was trying to Google, you know, Breaking Bad, Flying Saucer movie, whatever. I couldn't find it. And then I put on the dialogue. I was reading the dialogue, and I actually saw the phrase Earth versus the Flying Saucers in the context of dialogue. I was like, oh, this must be Earth versus Flying Saucers. And then at some point later on, I went to the IMDb page for the episode, and if you scroll there, it's right there. You know, plot connections, Earth versus Flying Saucers, 1956. I was like, oh, I could save myself 20 minutes of research here. Anyway, the beginning of this episode is... Oh, it's the opening scene. It's with Hank and the other DEA officers, agents. It's the Operation Icebreaker scene. Gotta say, again, you know, calling a shot. Hank's a damn psychic because he has this whole supposition that, I think we got a new kingpin here. It turns out you're going to turn out to be correct about that one. It just takes him a little while to get to that point. It's too bad, Hank, you didn't foresee all the misery and eventual death that's going to be heading your way. Oh, spoiler. I also wish he had called it Operation Ice Station Zebra, but that's just me, because, we that's more of a Better Call Saul thing. Hey, goofy note before I get into more interesting things. When Walt is cooking the chicken on the grill early in the episode, was it just me, or did the sound that they were using here, did it almost sound like the chicken were screaming on the grill? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I could see that. There's definitely some kind of whatever. I'm sure he was, thinking of, I suppose he was thinking about killing Crazy 8, but yeah, definitely horrible noise going on. Interesting. The sound effects in this show have always been great. There will be any number of times we're going to rave about it's Dave Porter, right? The use of music and sound on this show. I mean, we can go on about just the visuals alone, whether it be the cinematography, the use of color, which is extremely prevalent throughout Breaking Bad, to the point where each character is actually is practically identified by a specific color. But it's just these little touches here and there that don't necessarily call attention to themselves unless you actually give it some thought. And it was just a moment where I went, oh, that's kind of... Again, it's these discordant tones or kind of just somewhat disturbing, off-putting kind of little things like that, which kind of stuck out to me. Now, there's something that they do, and they do it at the end of the previous episode, combined with how they pick up the story here. And it's something that they do very well on Breaking Bad. I just want to give it a minute to chat about it. And it's what is generally referred to as the economics of storytelling. Because this is something that it's not the only show that does it, that's for sure. But Breaking Bad does it exceedingly well. And I'll show you what I'm talking about out there. We ended the previous episode with Walt saying, as I said, there's something I need to tell you. But when we pick up that specific storyline again, it's apparently 48 hours later. So we skipped the telling. That's number one. But then it's followed by when Skyler breaks down at the patio table and then Walt has to come out and tell everyone what's going on and what's happening. And, Marie, Hank, his son, all Walt says is, I have cancer, lung cancer, it's bad. That's it. And you realize there's nothing else that really needs to be said. No.
And the fact that the fact that they choose to have him use so few words, and of course we can go on and on about Cranston's performance, yada yada yada. Of course that goes, but on the original written page, that is extreme. That's not just economic; it's very smart storytelling because the lack of words says so much more. You know?
Yeah.
It's I marveled at that because I keep imagining how not me, but a dozen other writers would have approached it, and they definitely would have given it more. And it's like no, less. It's a cliche, but it's so true more often than not. I wish I could follow it with our podcast sometimes, but I can't. Less is more.
Do what I do, when you type a 7,500 word message and I respond with yes. I mean, it works.
You do it all the time. It's yes or heh. It drives me crazy. I actually see something you and my mother have in common, so let's chew on that.
Ooh, that's wrong, Mike.
So this leads to we're watching. I call it the palpable awkwardness of Walt sitting on the edge of the couch, while Marie and Skylar, they are basically mapping out what they're going to do, how they're going to deal with Walt's diagnosis, what's the battle plan. This is the kind of thing we're going to come to see is in large part what fuels Walt to go further down the road to Heisenberg. And it's what we've been talking about throughout these last few episodes. And it's not just his lack of control, but it's others making decisions for him. I mean, quite honestly, when you watch that scene, and this is where you just got to take all these other aspects of the show and how smart they are, the shirt that he's wearing, the shirt itself looks kind of emasculating. There's no way he picked that shirt. There just isn't. I'm sorry. It just, this is the way it looks like. Ooh. It's like, did your wife buy that for you when she was buying your son clothes or something? It's not a good shirt.
Yeah, and the way that Marie acts in this scene's really, it's just perfect too for that character. And then the way Hank flips.
Oh my God,
funny, realistic, but it's funny.
Oh yeah, and we're of course we're going to get an even better scene of this nature later on. Well, I'll talk about it then, but I'll say it now. It is kind of a fun little. Again, I talk about running tropes or themes, or this is more of a trope thing. It's the family meetings.
Yeah,
and we're gonna get a few on this show, and this might technically be the first one. It's the next one, which is just the real fun one to talk about. But
yeah, but I still like Marie. She does that thing where she's an expert in all things medical because she works at a whatever she works at a hospital or something like that. And of course, see that now, because if you were a nurse for 1 week 7 years ago, you're qualified to tell somebody the COVID vaccine doesn't work. It's the same kind of shit like that, except Marie, of course, isn't that fucking stupid. But
right, I was gonna say, don't we all know people like that?
Oh, yes, we do.
And I unfortunately, I think at least one of them actually might listen to this podcast, so I'm not going to go into any specific examples. But I will move on to another first-time meeting thing. We meet Skinny Pete and Combo for the first time. We're going to meet the other member of the Pinkman posse in the next episode, Badger. But it's like, oh, here we are. And then the minute I saw them, I instantly remembered what's going to happen to Combo, and I got, oh, anyway. I'm going to talk a bit more about them in the next episode when we get to Badger, I think. Now, not as interesting. So, I'm looking at what... I think this is the point where they're starting to... oh, no, they haven't started to show the house yet. It was more Combo's reaction to it, but I think he's going to. But I'm trying to imagine what would be more burdensome. What the actual cost is going to be to fix and repair the damage done by that acid bath situation, or trying to explain what exactly happened to cause it. Because even the dumbest contractor on Earth is not going to buy it's due to the house settling. No, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's like, what? That's not. It's a thing, but that's not a result of such a thing. Oh man, but then we bouncing ahead a little bit more. Another major first use kind of thing of a Breaking Bad trope. It's the little bit with Jesse being paranoid. He's getting high. He's hallucinating. And this is something we're going to see a lot more of in future episodes or seasons. And these things are going to get a bit more extended. And they're going to get maybe a little bit more troubling as the series progresses. But this is we get a little bit here. And I would say that's a first. That's going to become a bigger thing in later seasons. Now, speaking of paranoia, while driving down the highway, you have that once again. You have that moment where Walt thinks approaching sirens are coming for him. You know, it's kind of a figurative and almost literal echo of the scene that bookended the pilot, right?
Yeah.
You know, this time he thinks that the cops are coming for him, where no, they're not. They probably have some some other criminal they're going for, just like the fire engine, same kind of thing. Another really great notable thing about this episode, and maybe it's the way I might even refer to this episode, this is the Ken Wins episode. And once I saw him show up, I got so happy because I remembered what's going to happen in this episode, and I remember what's going to happen when we eventually see him on Better Call Saul. And then in the moment, I thought, oh, so I actually, for just a hot second there, I thought, wait, who gets him worse, Walter White or Jimmy McGill? And then I realized, oh, clearly Walt, because what does Jimmy and Kim do in Better Call Saul? They run up a really huge bar bill that he has to pay off, essentially. What does Walt do? He basically destroys his car. But there's a reason why I wanted to focus on this other than it kind of being, I don't know if I call it iconic, but it's kind of fun. I'm going to point something out here. If you're listening to the episode closely, later in the episode, I think it's when he's pulling up to the gas stop, listen to the dialogue that Ken Wins is saying. He's bragging about the best freaking attorney who's got a little team of ninjas who works on his behalf. This guy's got crap on everybody. I kind of think they were already anticipating a Saul Goodman character at this point. I absolutely think that they had that in mind already. I have no doubt about that. What's funny is that obviously we now know it couldn't be Saul Goodman based on what we saw in that future episode of Better Call Saul. So I was like, oh, okay. Since he never actually said Saul Goodman, you can kind of get away with that. But if you listen to it, it's like, oh, that's what they had in mind. I believe that fervently. And if I believe it, it must be true. Go on.
Yep. No, I was agreeing. Yep.
Okay. Oh, by the way, it also occurs to me, I guess this would fall under the running gag category. Ridiculous personalized license plates are a running gag throughout Breaking Bad. Because you've got Ken Wins, Jesse, who idiotically has the captain on his car. I love that. That makes a lot of sense. You're known in the drug trade as, was it Captain Crunch or whatever the hell it is or something, and then you actually put that on your car because, who's going to notice that? And, of course, we just mentioned Saul Goodman. We know next season we're going to see, the lawyer, or at some point we'll see the lawyer upplayed as well. I got to check out, I got to remember when we get to the beginning of season 2 to check out Tuco's car, because I'm wondering if there's a goofy license plate on that one. I don't remember. We also meet the Pinkman family for the first time. What's interesting here is we're going to see Mr. and Mrs. Pinkman a few more times over the course of the next couple of seasons, as well as in El Camino. But poor young Jake Pinkman, Jesse's younger brother, he'll be referred to again, but he will never appear on screen again, unless you count the frame picture, but that's obviously not what I mean. That's interesting that they just chose. I mean, I guess one could say, "Oh, maybe the kid, the actor, wasn't available, whatever." It's like they could have recast it. It wouldn't have been, he was only in one episode. No one would have cared. But I just thought it was interesting. We'll see the parents a bunch of times, but we never see Jake ever again. Maybe it's not that interesting. Okay.
Yeah. No, I it's like, I understood what they were trying to do in this one episode, but kind of like the Maria shoplifting thing is just kind of like, I could have done without it. I just didn't need it to ever happen, I guess. So it's fine. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it just never really goes anywhere. Or it's super.
The shoplifting is more. Whether we needed to see it or not, I don't know, because we'd already gotten we already knew she was a thief, I believe, right? But it's more significant as far as later in the season with the situation with the tiara, because of it leading to the break in the relationship between her and Skylar. But yeah, right. I know what you're saying. Another significant first in this episode that you can't help but miss. Can't miss it, and you shouldn't. It's the first use of time-lapse photography. That's something that's going to become a signature of the Breaking Bad universe, and will also be used in Better Call Saul. Hence why I said Breaking Bad universe. This first time that they use it, it's essentially it's purely done to convey the passage of time that nearly a day, an almost entire day has passed as Jesse has fallen asleep in his childhood bed. It just lets us know, he slept straight through the day, right to the next night. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, but you can, if you want to, it's a really fascinating thing. You can go on YouTube or something, and someone, at least one person, there's probably multiple versions of it, they've compiled all the time-lapse photography moments throughout Breaking Bad into one complete running thing. It's like 6.5 minutes of it, which is actually a lot, because usually those moments don't last very long. It's a lot of clouds. So the scene where Jesse, I guess he unexpectedly pops by the White household to debrief, as he says. I gotta say, this is, to me, it's the first. Even though he's had these little testy little exchanges with Jesse before, and obviously the fact that everything began on a threat to begin with, but I think we could go along with it. But here, Walt's really being kind of a dick. It's like, this is the one time I was like, to me, I'm not putting it on my list of first, but to me, it's like, this is the first time I was like, you're not being terribly sympathetic right now, Walt. You're being a bit of an asshole.
He's being an abusive fuck, so, I mean, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's not fun. Oh.
It's one of those things I had forgotten about. I was like, I've always I was one of those people who kind of rooted for Walter White for most, if not all, of his run on Breaking Bad, and I kind of forgot about him. I'm like, just like, that's not very nice. Anyway, but it's the fact that Jesse is there. He's not there to solely ask about cooking again. He's there because they have no one else to talk to about the shared horrible experience. And and when he came back, after he left, when Walt still had to deal with the Crazy 8 situation or whatever, it looked like Walt just cleaned everything up and left without even saying goodbye. Which also means that Walt melted or dissolved Crazy 8 on his own. He did that all by himself without Jesse's assistance, apparently. So he really did man up, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But he did it without saying goodbye. Anyway.
And he didn't want Jesse to fuck it up either, probably.
Right, absolutely. And, there isn't, kind of along the lines of what you were saying, I wouldn't say there's a whole lot else that's terribly significant about the episode other than just the deepening of the character portraits we're getting here. But this, and going along with what I was saying before about the use of language, at this point, we're at the 4th episode of the season, and I believe it's the 3rd time, an F-bomb is dropped. But this time it's when Walt Jr. says, "Why don't you just fucking die already?" And I was like, "Whoa, I'm pretty sure that didn't air on AMC, because I don't think that was the fuck that they let in there." I don't remember.
I know I'm kind of tired of all the cursing. I might have to try to find the broadcast versions and then throw away my Blu-rays. So we'll see.
I want it as it was originally written. Okay, so I'm going to say we can bounce over to number 5 on the list of episodes from that season. Episode number 5, which was great.
Yeah. I have one more thing from episode 4, but there's a quote where Hank tells Walt, "Whatever happens, always take care of your family." I think that's like really like the moment where, I mean, like you can really tell, like, you know, Walt. It's just going to be about Walt. It's not like a Walt like family thing, but like it's really like a strong early moment where you can just tell Walt's reaction to it is it's not a good, you know, he's not being a good guy at all there, and Hank's just being like, you know, solid and caring and thoughtful, and Walt does not have a reaction to it that you know, a person that isn't weak and pathetic would have.
Right. Well, it's going to be interesting watching Walt's reaction to things, especially things that Hank says, but or the family around him, and how there's a shift, but it's not a dramatic shift, and it's interesting to talk about why that is. But that's if memory serves, I think I hopefully I have that in my notes for a later scene. I think I know which scene it is, so I'll wait to that point to talk about it. And if it doesn't come up by then, I'll bring it up myself. Well, I'm going to be bringing it up anyway, so that didn't make any sense. So, episode number 5.
Yep.
Which is Gray Matter. It was directed by Trisha Brock, who also only has this one Breaking Bad episode to her credit. But don't worry, she's got a lot of other stuff under her belt. She's directed episodes of Mr. Robot, Community, 30 Rock, Walking Dead, Bridgerton, and The Deuce. So she's done a lot of stuff. But perhaps more interesting, well, no, it's not more, same level. Writing, again, Vince Gilligan, of course, but now, for the first time, as I mentioned earlier, someone else is getting a co-writing credit. And on this episode, it's Patty Lynn. The interesting thing with her is that her writing experience before this episode, and she might have been story editor before that, whatever, was that she had scripted episodes of Friends, Freaks and Geeks, and Desperate Housewives. So, interesting combination there. It kind of makes you go, oh, is there going to be more funny stuff in this episode? Well, when the very first thing is we're going to get to meet the other member of the Pinkman Posse, the co-founder of the, as you mentioned them earlier, the not-so-legendary Twat Hammer. We meet Badger, fan favorite Badger. I would say, by the way, of the Pinkman Posse, Matt Jones is the actor. I think he's probably the guy of that little small select group who's probably gotten the most work and success post Breaking Bad. I know the actor who plays Skinny Pete has done a few other things, Hannibal, whatever. But Matt Jones, he's had like these long running continuing roles on different sitcoms like Mom and Bob Hart's Abishola, whatever. And I didn't even know that because I don't watch either of those shows. I looked like, oh my god, he's done 78 episodes of this show, and he's done 100 whatever episodes. It's like, oh my god, Matt Jones, and he's a comedian, so he's made some bank.
Good.
So we had already met Gretchen in a flashback in that third episode, and in this episode we get to meet Elliot. Now, the title had clued us in, and of course, as anything does with Breaking Bad, it has multiple meanings that pertain to, you know, Walt and Jesse's current and future life decisions, you know, gray area, gray matter, whatever. But we learn a little bit, without telling us too much, about the story of gray matter. And I believe we're going to hear more about that in a future episode, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a very valuable piece of the Walter White backstory. It's incredibly important, and I'll tell you why. Because for the next 5 seasons, many viewers, such as myself, whenever we're musing about the Walter White transformation, now, whether you want to go on with Vince Gilligan's way too many times repeated analogy of turning Mr. Chips into Scarface, or maybe something that's less dated, thank you. We point to the Gray Matter's technology story as proof that the source of Walt's rage happened way before the cancer and the drugs. That his past is in fact what fuels him and what inflicted the original burning wound that is whatever. It's infected his pride. It's eaten away at him like acid through a bathtub, quite frankly. Because it's the fact that at the end of the day, when you know about the Grey Matter story, it still is his fault. It was still his choice to leave. He made the bad decision, and it flourished into this multi-million or even billion-dollar company. His festering denial of that's something he suppressed. It's so let me use a good word, intrinsically woven into his identity. I mean, we're going to get a little bit more on that later in the series, but it's like the writing is on the wall here. So I don't even need that blank to be even filled in anymore, because it's like, I get it. And once again, making a reference to what happens towards the end of the series, what we see happen, without getting into the details of it, because I want to save the moment we talk about that, but what we see happening, let's just say, towards the end of the penultimate episode and towards the beginning of the final episode, pretty much solidifies that. if I may be so bold, that, oh yeah, this was a big thing. This is really something. Look what it did, at the end of the road there. So I think that's why I say it's extremely important to me.
Yeah, totally.
And if Elliot, and he makes a reference to Elliot as he's like the man who has everything, then what does that make Walt? Is Walt a man with almost nothing? But outside of money, that doesn't actually become true until Ozymandias. But he's a man who's blamed Elliot for taking away everything. I don't know. Part of me even thinks there's part of Walt that even blames Skylar, only because she represents the life he chose after Grey Matter.
Right.
But I think Walter White's one of his main flaws, until we get, again, to that final episode, is an inability to claim responsibility for his own lot in life.
Oh, yeah. Just like, people of well, I guess I don't need to go into politics here, but there's a certain subset of people that are really good at blaming others for their own fucking mistakes, and then they just end up being garbage people and always find a way to justify it. And Walter White definitely does it here. It's nobody's fault but his. It's, so they decided to, sell, some freaking Grey Matter shares to, buy a house because you got somebody pregnant. Not Skylar's fault, jackass. It's just something that you chose to do, and something happened and didn't work good for you. I mean, this is what happens, I mean, but just, some people do, well, they can't take any responsibility for the way their own choices work out, even if those choices are just simple, I did this and it didn't work out. Nobody was to blame. I just somebody else got something and I didn't get it, so I need to feel like shit because of it. It's just life. That's not how it goes. But right. Some people can't handle it, and Walt is one of those people. Right.
Well, it's not. I guess I don't know if it really counts as irony. I'd have to ask Alanis Morissette or somebody like that. But it's interesting that, as we were talking earlier, that so much of Walt's issues is revolves around his ability to make choices, or being allowed to make choices and not having a choice, whatever. But then it also filters right back to, unless I'm forgetting something, which is very possible, and hopefully you'll remind me when I do forget things. But as far as I can recall from this episode and what we hear later on, Walt made that choice to not go further with Grey Matter. He wasn't forced out. I don't feel he was forced to make that decision. He made that decision.
Yeah, totally. And nobody forced him, but he's got his own narrative, that he has to freaking, have to maintain the fact that dude, you fucked up.
Yes, and exactly, because the thing is, the irony is, someone who goes on about needing or wanting to be able to make his own choices, when he did, he made a bad choice. And parallel time, the fact that he then chooses to go the route of drug manufacturing, dealing, and everything that's going to happen over the next couple of years is all based on him making that decision. Hey, guess what? You know what that is? That's another bad decision. It's a Breaking Bad decision. Anyway. All right. So, where are we here? But also, sticking with that just for a moment, the fact that he turns down the job that Elliot offers him and he snaps at Skyler as a result of all this, it's just a classic Walter White example of his pride getting in the way of making a potentially good decision. Because a rational person would be like, that's a good decision. If you feel these people owe you something, and he clearly does, then what they're giving you, it's not charity. It's them trying to make up for what. If you want to think they screwed you over, then this is a small way of them trying to do something. You're letting your pride get in the way, literally, of if everything's about your family, then them helping you is going to help your family. But no, you're choosing to undertake a immensely risky criminal enterprise instead, just because you can be in charge of it. That's bad.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I love how the wackiness of Skype made your voice get all small for the last thing. I was like, all of a sudden it's like I'm dealing with one of the Munchkins from Munchkinland. I kid. All right, it's the wacky thing with our connection sometimes. So, by the way, what did I write here? Do you know that how in the Breaking Bad universe, Gilligan and Gould and everybody else, they always seem to love to give... Oh, here we go. This silliness. They love to give the most distinct and off-the-beaten-track cars to characters. Just to really underscore their identity, the type of character that they are, and so on. I mean, it's... I might even go as far as to say it's almost an iconic thing about... Again, it's the Breaking Bad universe, so that way it covers both this show and Better Call Saul, because they most certainly do it on Better Call Saul as well. Again, everything from Walt's Aztec here to Jimmy McGill's Suzuki Esteem there. There's at least one other crazy car that comes to mind that we saw, that Hummer or whatever. I don't know whatever happened to the car that, the fact that they named the Jesse Pinkman movie after a car like El Camino, and the car he starts off with here is this, it's almost a ridiculously massive Monte Carlo.
Yeah.
You've got the iconic RV, which is essentially the vehicularized proxy of Walt and Jesse's relationship, if you really think about it. The thing I didn't remember, again, I love when I see things, I forgot about that. That's such an interesting and somewhat silly choice, and especially for a very relatively minor side character. When you see Badger showing up at Jesse's place, they're continuing that tradition. He shows up in this weird little Pontiac Fiero that's from like the mid-1980s. It's like an 85 or an 86 Fiero. And it's just, it's a car that's ridiculously too small for a guy who's, 6 foot God knows what. He's like a Wookiee of a human being. And he gets out of this little weird, and considering what year the show is taking place, it's like a 30-year-old tiny sports car. The fact that it makes no sense actually makes perfect sense, because you can totally imagine Badger finding that one and buying it off some used from some guy for like $1,200 or something. I don't know. I just thought it was really funny, so I just wanted to point it out. It's also interesting, I think, that we know, because not only have we heard Mr. White talk about it, but we've also seen when we actually saw one of his papers, we know that Jesse wasn't a good student, and Walt scolded him for never paying attention in class. But it's interesting to see that he clearly was paying attention when Walt was showing him all those different types of glassware and equipment. The fact that he can remember all that and speak about it, not just with authority, and I'm not going to go as far as say reverence, but I just love the fact that he really, it's like, wow, just one cook, and he really remembers and knows his shit. I was very impressed by that.
Yeah.
I actually did wonder at the end of that other episode, where'd all the cook stuff go? Because when Jesse first went into the trailer, the whole thing had just been totally cleaned out. And now I was like, hey, what happened to all the equipment? But, it's not really that important. But I was wondering about it. And then the gag, again, love Badger. He's definitely one of my favorites. The fact that he brings a crossbow. In case they happen to see javelinas in the desert. It's too funny. And yes, I will confess, because I do not hail, nor unlike you, have not visited that area, I did have to Google what a javelina was.
Yeah.
So basically, for those who, like me, maybe aren't familiar with it, it's kind of like a wild pig boar-like kind of creature. I honestly had no clue.
Yeah, they're nasty fuckers, yep.
And we do get, a musical montage here, which is another thing we're going to see tons of in Breaking Bad. And we get a little bit of outdoor time-lapse photography of the RV. Oh, RV is a very popular subject of a lot of time-lapse photography over the next 2 seasons, Spoiler, I think it happens like 7 times or something like that. We get the interiors, we get the exteriors, we get everything, it's night, it's day, it's clouds, it's a moon, whatever. But what's interesting about all this is that not only has the knowledge of the glassware rubbed off on Jesse, what's far more interesting is that, like Walter White, he's become something of a perfectionist. And that's really interesting, because Jesse, just a couple episodes, would not have been that way. And that shift is very interesting, I thought.
Yeah, and it can, kind of thing too that just like Walt isn't going to give him much respect for it, like he probably should be doing, other than when he's trying to manipulate him, of course. But I don't think it takes Walt a long time to recognize that fact.
Right. But he will. It's just it's at a point of, when do we believe that Walt actually truly believes that, as opposed to just trying to manipulate, just trying to get his way with him.
Yeah.
The situation with Jesse and Badger, we get if the fight between Jesse and Walter White wasn't ridiculous enough, we get a beautifully stupid fight between Jesse and Badger. I mean, helicopter, bitch. Oh, it's so good. And if that wasn't good enough, we get at least part of the scene. And I even considered putting a clip of it in the podcast, but there was no way to cut it down to a reasonable length without losing something, so I couldn't do it. There is few things that are more fun and also kind of mildly cringe-inducing than those family meetings and the talking pillow. By the way, number 2 on my list of things that there need to be a t-shirt about, if there isn't one. There probably is. I'm watching this scene. I'm thinking there must be amazing bloopers from the scenes like this. I'm thinking it's shocking how at a certain point Marie is making the most sense, which is like, what?
Yeah.
But it's I think it's almost, I don't know. It might not be quite I'm the danger or I'm the one who knocks or whatever, but I've got the talking pillow now. It's pretty awesome. And then Walt goes into this monologue about what the remainder of his life would be like if he decides to go with treatment. And here's where I was talking about earlier. It's a little on the nose, but that's the relevant part of all this. Because some of this, I don't know how much I believe a lot of what he's doing. But this is the part I do believe, when he talks about choices and having always felt they were made for him as opposed to by him. That is absolutely true. Some of the other things, I think he's putting it on a little bit here and there. It's just because by the way he just looks and reacts to everybody, I think Walt does become a very good liar, but there are certain points I always think, if anyone just really watched him the entire time, it would almost be like, a bad guy on a soap opera. You're not picking up on the fact that he's kind of looking at you with kind of, more than mild disdain. I don't know. But what's interesting is he says that he's not going to do treatment. And then I think it's almost like he does it almost deliberately. And he doesn't, but it feels like it, because it then becomes up to him to change his mind, which is what he does the following morning. Which really is about him changing his mind about cooking again with Jesse, you know? So I love it. It's not even just, I don't even think it's parallels at this point. It's, his mind seems to be more on that. Because I think at this point, he believes he's going to die. He believes everything, all that is going to be for naught. But if he can keep them at bay, you know, so that Skylar will, you know, get out of his ass, as he might say, as I believe he says in one of these episodes. That way he can then go forward with making the money from the meth and whatever, and leaving that huge nest egg for his family. So I think to him that's the priority rather than actually getting treatment.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be talking so much, Dad.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
It's just like, you know, I wonder like how much of a factor, like if the family didn't kind of push him into getting the treatment that was expensive, would he have had to get so much deeper into the meth thing to make enough money to cover the expensive treatment? You know, I'm just thinking about that. I mean, and like if it's actually, you know, like not trying to justify it, but like I think it is actually, you know, it could be a factor too. That like it, you know, it is a step in the chain of, you know, he needs more money now because of this thing. If he chose not to do that, he would be leaving retirement money for him, but he wouldn't have to make the money for this thing right now. That's definitely, you know, something. Not that they're responsible or they're to blame, but you know, it is a piece of the puzzle.
Right. Well, right, because they, as opposed to just using, you know, the doctor he'd already seen, and moving forward treatment from that point on, the fact that Marie and Skylar combined to get him access to meet like one of the leading oncologists in the entire country, which turns out to be super expensive. Something like, you know, there's at one point it's almost like a $5,000 fee just to get in the door or something like that.
Oh yeah,
which is insane.
Consultation, yeah,
right. But yeah, things like that, as opposed to if he had gone the route that he normally would have, which at the end of the day, would that make a difference or not? I don't know. I mean, we do know what's going to end up happening in the following season, but we also know what's going to happen in a couple of years, so it's hard to say. It's cancer, man.
Yeah, but fortunately, the American system has gotten so much better since then. So, as you know, you haven't even thought about making meth lately, have you? No.
No comment.
It's fun. Yeah.
But yeah, medical bills have been. Yeah, we don't want to go down that road. I'll have to stop the podcast. So let's get to the next episode instead. The next episode which is the 6th episode. It's Crazy Handful of Nothing. This episode makes me happy. It's directed by Bronwyn Hughes, who did have one more directing foray into the Breaking Bad universe when she directed the season 5 premiere of Better Call Saul, Magic Man. And again, written by Vince Gilligan, but this time his co-writer was George Mastras. I hope I pronounced it right. If I didn't, he won't ever hear this. He's a dude who's either wrote or co-wrote 10 more Breaking Bad episodes, including some major favorites of folks like, for example, the aforementioned earlier Crawl Space, or Tahajali. Tahajali, whatever. But let me because I've mentioned the titles before, we gotta mention the title of this one, because it's one of the many things that makes me so happy about this episode. I want to give it I'm not going to hit the little sound effect. Oh, yes, I will. All right, it's a bad sounding round of applause for that title, because look, it was already cool that Gilligan dipped into his little cinephile hat when he pulled out that quote from Sweet Smell of Success, and they broke that out across the 2nd and 3rd episodes of the season. You know, the cat's in the bag in the river, whatever. But he totally upped the coolness factor by basically betting on a quote from Cool Hand Luke. This quote, if I remember it correctly, because I love Cool Hand Luke, it's what George Kennedy's character, Dragline, says about Paul Newman's Luke character. Luke had won a poker game earlier with no cards of any value, and Dragline was looking on, and he basically says, I beat you with a handful of nothing, and that inspires a nickname he says later on. That inspires the nickname Cool Hand Luke, because Luke says, you know, sometimes nothing can be a really cool hand, and then later when they're on the road gang, he refers to him as a crazy handful of nothing. So that's where the title comes from. which now I realize at least 3 of Paul Newman's greatest films all feature a really famous poker scene. That's kind of interesting. All right, well, I'll save that for the Paul Newman podcast. So we'll get back to this one.
Yes.
By the way, I'm totally on board for doing a Paul Newman podcast, just saying. This is another episode that gives us a sneak peek at something far later in the episode. And in this case, it's when Walt, it's right after Walt has literally lowered the boom, so to speak. As we see Walt lie earlier in the episode about getting a check from Elliot, I almost wished I had decided to let's start keeping track of Walt's lies, which might be impossible at a certain point. So I think we're at a couple dozen now. But it reminds me of when our last quote-unquote president, and how I think it was the Washington Post or one of those publications, kept a running tally, and at a certain point, he lied 48,522 times. I wonder if by the end of the 5 seasons of Breaking Bad, if Walt might have a number that would be at least in the 4-figure range. I'm curious. I've also mentioned in 2 previous episodes that Walt White's lectures to his class are also telling us something else about what's going on, either with his character or in this specific episode. And in this episode, Walt is talking about chemical reactions and changes. And the way he talks about them, you think it would pertain to his own reaction to the chemotherapy, as he's clearly about to get sick. But as his lesson continues, he starts talking about explosives. Not to mention, you actually see the fulminated mercury is actually written on the chalkboard, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So they're actually foreshadowing the end of the episode, which was already hinted at in that cold open to the episode as well. So later on we get the scene with a therapy group. It's cancer patients and their families, and the only reason I bring it up, because I don't want to bring up every single scene, as I said already. I think I might have glossed over another, maybe a central trope of Breaking Bad, or I started to say something about it, but then I kind of skipped by it. Except for when he's teaching a class, Walter White seems to kind of despise being in group settings. He's rarely comfortable. He always tends to have that kind of a look on his face. It's something that's what I mentioned earlier, like that barely disguised disdain kind of a thing. It doesn't matter if it's a family meeting or a therapy session or something more official or work related. He always kind of looks that way. And you can feel his, he clearly does not ever want to be there. Now, I know, especially once people know he's been diagnosed with cancer, it's that he doesn't like being an object of pity. It's a major part of all this. And it totally feeds into his major issue or his flaw of pride. But yeah, it's something that we see time and time again,
Yeah, he definitely, he's kind of he's almost like a stand-up comedian that's good up in the spotlight, but just doesn't want to mingle afterwards,
With him, it's almost like the reverse.
Yeah.
Because, the comedian would be great in front of a crowd, but, one-on-one, they're always kind of like, He actually has his moments of being, kind of personable or even funny or whatever in smaller settings. But once you get more than 2 people, all of a sudden, no. But yeah, absolutely. Now, one of my favorite things about this episode is the moment between Walt and Jesse when Jesse realizes that Walt has cancer. It's touching without being sentimental. And you can tell that Walt looks at Jesse just a little bit differently in that scene, and maybe even from that point on. Because it's not just because that Jesse recognized the dots on Mr. White's chest as evidence of some sort of targeted radiation, because that was done with his own aunt, but also remembering the fact that he remembers that stage 3A cancer means that it's already gotten into your lymph nodes.
Yeah,
because it's interesting because, like we said before with the cook, once again, Jesse is showing that, yeah, he can retain information. He actually is smarter than people are giving him credit for. I mean, it doesn't excuse things like Cow House, but whatever.
But also in a way here, even though Walt was maybe being an asshole teacher, but when he says apply yourself, he was right, because when Jesse applies himself, he's fucking smart. I mean, he just is.
Exactly. What was written? What was funny was what he wrote on that paper. It wasn't just that he wrote "apply yourself," but the other comment was ridiculous.
Yeah.
I've seen teachers write "apply yourself" on things. I've never seen them write ridiculous, but it's perfect because it goes right along the lines of what you just said. Because a lot of what we see Jesse doing when he first meets Walt and whatever, everything from, let's face it, it's everything. It's the car. It's the name. It's the way he carries himself and the way he's dressed, whatever. Ridiculous might actually be the right word for it.
Yeah.
But so that's actually that's spot on. And I think it's all that. But now that Walt's kind of starting to see Jesse in a somewhat different light, that's also why I think Walt is willing to let him finish the batch. Whereas I don't think he would have done that beforehand, regardless of how sickly he was feeling. We then, sometime after that, we get another one of those cool montages. It's the montage of Jesse slinging meth. I think that might be minor first. First time we see the what will become the oft-used doghouse location.
They have good chili cheese dogs. They're fairly spicy, too. By the time you're done eating one, you definitely know you ate something hot.
That's lovely. And then you have to use Jesse's toilet. Since we know that this episode is it's going to lead to dealing with a much larger scale distribution with a certain tightly wound dude. I can't remember, because again, haven't watched in a very long time. Is this significantly the last time that we see Jesse really being a street dealer? Or does he still do it to some extent, at least early on in the second season, before he kind of stops doing that?
I think he still does, some kind of stuff, like I'm not exactly sure, what he's doing when, Spooge, gets a drop on him and stuff, but I still think he's,
That's what I was thinking. I couldn't remember because of the Spooge. It's funny you mentioned Spooge. That's exactly, I was like, wait, is he still doing it? He might. I knew at a certain point the posse is basically doing it on his behalf, your Badgers, your Skinny Peas, and so on. I just couldn't remember if we still seeing him make those small type of sales. I can't, again, I apologize. I haven't watched season 2 in a long time. I guess I'll know once we start that rewatch. So no need to tell me on Facebook. Don't worry. I just don't remember. See, I'm honest. I can't help it. In this episode, it's not really important, but I'm just going to mention it because it occurred to me when I was watching. Although there are a number of times throughout the episode that Cranston's hair looks slightly odd, all up until the scene where, especially when Hank visits him at school to ask about that gas mask, because it's crystal meth clear that Cranston is already wearing a wig. So my initial assumption is that they might have shot that later scene of Walt actually shaving his head earlier in the production. That's probably what makes the most sense to me, unless they just had to reshoot these scenes later on so they got a wig for him. I'm thinking it was the former, not the latter. I just think it's funny because it's one of those things where when you watch the show, his hair looks a little odd here and there, but I still, at certain points early on at least, I still believe that's your hair. But then also it's like, no, that is not your hair. It just doesn't, there's something about it just doesn't look right to me.
Yeah, the little average listener might not know this, but Scott's been known to wear a wig from time to time, and so he definitely knows when somebody's wearing fake hair on television. He'll point it out if he has to.
But and the sad thing is, it's usually a chest wig is what I'm wearing. But because I'm a big Tom Selleck guy, I don't want to emulate the guy. Anyway. Then there's the one for my pew. Anyway, so Hank's comments to Walt after he notices how much of the lab's way too expensive inventory has clearly been depleted by someone cooking meth, And he says to him, we don't want people to start wondering about you. So I'm going to call it as that's the first time Hank had any sort of actual opportunity to suspect Walt and didn't. It's clear why he wouldn't. I'm not faulting Hank, but it's the first time like, if he wasn't your brother-in-law, he would at least be on your list of suspects right now.
Yeah. Do you think it's like a disrespect thing? Like he just thinks Walt is like weak and pathetic, or just like he's known Walt a long time, thinks he's kind of a dork, but a stand-up guy, doesn't suspect anything.
I think Hank believes the latter, and Walt believes the former.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I think Hank means it, as you said. You just no, you're my brother-in-law. I love you, or whatever. And Walt takes it as another sign of disrespect, which also you can even say this feeds into that later scene, which I'm so looking forward to talking about. Well, again, the poker scene obviously is what I'm referring to.
Yep.
But it's just fun when you look at this moment and then you almost want to keep track of these. That there's going to be several more instances, and you start to juxtapose them, especially this first one, to what happens, I don't know, let's say midway through the 5th season, maybe. I want to put those two on back to back, like, oh, look at that. It's like Lois Lane finally figuring out who Superman is. Okay, another major first is the first time we meet Tuco. I got to say that Raymond Cruz, the actor who plays Tuco, dude really left an impression with a part he played over. At the time, it was just 4 episodes of Breaking Bad. We're talking the pre-Better Call Saul stuff. Because this is a character, and what he comes up with here, it's a genuinely scary villain. And this is a guy that those who saw this guy mainly on a show like The Closer, because he was on more than 100 episodes of that show. That's where I knew him from. He's such a nice guy on that. Not so much here. Also significant, I'm pretty sure about this, I think he's the first, not including, the obvious 2 lead and supporting lead, I think he's the first significant Breaking Bad character who shows up, actually as a surprise, on Better Call Saul. I mean, it's at the end of the very first episode, if I'm not mistaken, right? Isn't it the very end?
Yeah. He's in episode 1. Yeah, he's the first
episode 1, and then episode 1, and then the rest of episode 2, and then we see him spring up. But he was the first one that made us go, "Oh, look who came back!" And okay.
Nice. I would have rather seen Ken Wins first, but we can settle for Raymond Cruz.
I just my last thing for Raymond Cruz is I'm just wondering, especially for probably still now, but especially way back then, how many times do you think strangers came up to him on the street and said "tight, tight, tight"?
Oh man,
poor guy. And speaking of Tuco, and we're keeping track of those things. Oh look. Guess who gets the crap kicked out of him again? Hey, Jesse, there you go. That's number 2. Let's get to that poker game I was talking about. The showdown between Walt and Hank. And Marie, who was a character I never particularly loved, at least in my earlier watches, but I'm growing to appreciate more now because I'm paying more attention to the different lines and things they do for her. And Marie is the one who actually says a handful of nothing, which made me go, "Oh, Marie, I think I actually like you a little bit more than I thought I did." But that whole the way, and I don't have notes on it, so I'm just going to go off on my own memory here. I think that scene and the showdown, if you want to call it the showdown between Hank and Walt playing poker, it's all about what we were talking about before. Because the fact that at some point early in that scene, Hank makes it clear he doesn't think Walt can really convincingly lie or bluff. He doesn't really take Walt seriously and in a way, it's not just that he doesn't take him seriously as a fellow card player. It goes back to the scene in with the lab equipment. I don't see you as a threat. I don't.
No. Yeah.
and it's kind of what you were talking about before, how the thing that Walt does, where at least early on, like it's almost like he almost wants to suppress the fact his probably need to like kind of prove that he actually knows something, but he turn, and how that starts to go away more as the series proceeds. And I think a lot of this goes with once Walt shaves his head, then all bets are off, I think. But it's almost, I think Walt treats this almost as a test of masculinity between them. Is the way I looked at it.
Yeah, totally.
And also, it's also the first time Walt gets to do something to impress his son, in between him and Hank, because Hank has been stealing the spotlight with everything, whether it be everything from the gun and on his 50th birthday to being the one who, the scared straight situation, whatever. It's nice that Walt has this moment. So,
yeah,
I don't know if it's nice, but you know what I mean.
It's satisfying.
Oh, okay. I know this podcast is supposed to be about Breaking Bad, and it's not about me. But when Walt goes to see Jesse in the hospital, and tell me if you know where I'm going with this before I say it. When Skinny Pete tells him that Jesse's got a couple busted ribs. All right. Now, due to what happened to me this summer, I couldn't help but think when I'm watching this, Watchie's going to be like fine and just like within days of this. Meanwhile, I just passed 6 weeks and it still hurts. So that's TV. I whatever. That first week or two, no bueno. But whatever. I just remember thinking, oh, he's got busted ribs, but of course he'll be fine. Because that's TV for you. At least when it's a character like, the Flash, okay, you got special healing powers because you're a superhero. Jesse, I'm pretty sure you don't have special healing powers. Except, anyway. All right, so I going back on the list of first times, again, I just mentioned it's the first time we're going to see Walt with a shaved head, and much more importantly than that, or it's actually part of that, to go along with that when he goes to see Tuco, super significant. This is the introduction of Heisenberg. So it's kind of, I call it one of the landmark episodes of this season. Because somehow, even with that lame-ass wispy mustache we talked about earlier, Walt still kind of looks like a badass with a shaved head here.
Very,
yeah. I mean, at least he's slightly imposing. Whereas before he looked kind of milquetoast. Let's put it that. By the way, everyone says milquetoast. Does anyone ever have milk? Anyway,
you don't tell me you dipped like toast in milk.
No, that's ridiculous. I don't even have toast. Ugh.
Oh, that's good.
Unless it's French. Anyway, so I also remember when I saw this episode for the very first time a billion years ago. I actually remembered learning about mercury fulminate when I was a kid. Because I remember I was a kid and I was watching the movie Mr. Roberts, great movie, and Jack Lemmon's character Ensign Pulver accidentally blows up the laundry room on the cargo ship because he's screwing around with mercury. He calls it fulminate of mercury, I should say, but it's the same thing. So that moment took my excitement of the show to just a different level altogether. And not because of the Mr. Roberts thing, just the fact that it's funny when you rewatch it, it's like it's all there for you and how they kind of call their shot in that lecture and everything else. But when you watched it for the first time, if you're not thinking on that kind of level, it's like, this is not meth. This, and when he does, when I would try to tell people to watch and they were kind of being about the first few episodes, I would tell them, no, give it till the 6th episode. If you don't want to watch it after you watch the 6th episode, then I don't know what to do with you. Then stop. But that's got to be, if you weren't grabbed before, that's got to be the one that'll grab you, I think. And that's what I think. Should I put?
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
That is really all else I have to say about that one, other than the fact, it's number 19 on my top 25. Greatest Breaking Bad episode.
I think the explosion's kind of cool. I just kind of wonder, was there ever any consequences to, like, the building, like, half blowing up? Like, did the cops ever show up and wonder what's going on, or is it just like such a sketchy part of town? Like, I mean, still, you'd think somebody would go there. Do they have to fake a gas leak? But you can't really do that because the utility company would have to go there. So, it's really cool looking, but I just kind of wonder, like, well, what happens next?
Well, that falls under the category of there's things you can wonder and speculate about, but if they don't really affect the overall story, they don't need to tell us. And I think that's how they treat something like that. But it is. I am curious. I didn't specifically think. The only thing that occurred to me that's even close to that is, I'm surprised that wouldn't have attracted the cops or someone, because it is an explosion. Someone would have reported it, unless someone would have been like, "Oh no, I'm not reporting anything that goes on over there. I know what goes on over there." But but how far away is the nearest precinct? Would people not have? But it's a rabbit hole you can go down. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get to the last episode number 7, a no rough stuff type deal. It's directed by Tim Hunter. Tim Hunter. He's a great TV director. You must love Tim Hunter because he directed a few episodes of the original run of Twin Peaks.
Oh, yeah.
This dude, he also directed Homicide: Life on the Street, Carnival, House. He directed a bunch of Mad Men episodes. And several great episodes of Hannibal. He's a good one. I mean, come on. Twin Peaks, Mad Men, Hannibal. There you go. Bing, bang, boom. You know it's against the other ones. The other important thing about this, as far as the credits are concerned, Vince Gilligan collaborates with Peter Gould on this script. I do not have to give Peter Gould's resume. We all know who he is if you've been listening to this podcast.
Yes, he's related to Jay Gould, legendary railroad tycoon.
Oh, I thought it was related to Harold Gould, who appeared in The Sting, which was one of those movies that Paul Newman played poker in. Anyway,
very nice.
I could have went with Elliot Gould, but I thought Harold Gould, Rhoda's father. Anyway, was he Rhoda's father? I think he was Rhoda's father. Well, see, I can improvise at the best. Anyway, but beyond writing, he wrote, I think 10 other Breaking Bad episodes, but we all know he's also the co-creator. And in many ways, some kind of feel he's more the main guy behind Better Call Saul than Vince Gilligan is. Because if you start peeling apart the credits for Better Call Saul, Vince Gilligan only has 3 actual writing credits on the show, and Gould has 9 or 10. So he's put it. Yeah. He's always the one talking. Whenever they talk about the show and what's coming on, it's always Peter Gould as the lead guy more than it tends to be Vince Gilligan. Again, Gilligan's totally involved, but I think Gould kind of shoulders a bit more of the burden than Gilligan.
Yeah, and Gilligan respects him enough to let him, just wants him to go do his own thing. Kind of like Hank wanting Walt to take care of his own parental stuff thing.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, I think Gilligan definitely functions more like an executive producer, who will will hang out with the writers and do stuff on that. So
right,
but it's a really good show.
So again, we have a title. The title is yet another movie reference. This time to some movie called, I think, Fargo or something. Kind of rings a little bit of a bell. And for first-time listeners, because that's a possibility here, a little bit of sarcasm is due to the fact that the TV series Fargo is one that the STVD podcast has actually covered episode by episode since season 2. We just couldn't get in on season 1 because that show started, hey, guess what, right when this podcast started, when we were doing Mad Men. Anyway, that line is something that William H. Macy's character, Jerry Lundegaard, says to Steve Buscemi's Carl. And I am deliberately went out of my way to not try to do an impression of the voice because I'm just too tired to do it right now.
Oh,
I know. It's so sad. The opening scene of that episode, it's what I was talking about before about Walt being in groups of people. It's interesting thinking about that with this scene. It's at the school with the parents, the school officials, law enforcement, flaks, whatever. They're all wringing their hands and going on about the meth problem and the missing lab equipment. And the scene, it kind of feels like an extension of how dramatically Walt has shifted pretty much ever since he shaved the damn head. And I guess you could say sort of took on or adopted the Heisenberg persona. I'm not saying he's Heisenberg all the time, but it's now become part of him. I mean, yeah, we did see him become sexually adrenalized at the end of that pilot episode, but as if like maybe he was infused with the potency due to his introduction to crime or something. His Breaking Bad, so to speak. But now it's like he's reveling in his newfound power, that he's taking control. And it's interesting because I feel a little shallow saying this, but when I first started watching Breaking Bad, which was essentially me binging the first 2 seasons, I think it was from this point on, not this scene, but just the shorn-headed version of Walt White was what really kind of hooked me into the show fully. I just started thinking of it as being more cool at that point. But then again, I'm sure some idiots out there or podcasters out there might say I might have an affinity for a dude who chooses to shave his head the way I do. So there you go. Anyway. All right. We can actually bounce past a few scenes here because, how much there is, unless you have something you want to point out about them. Either be the realtor showing Jesse's house, or Walt visiting Jesse in the RV and telling him about the deal that he struck with Tuco, or I guess Walt and Skylar meeting with his oncologist. I would like to just go right to the junkyard. By the way, another first. We get the Heisenberg hat. That's kind of a big deal. I love Jesse's unspoken reaction to it. The way he just looks, and I think Walt is like, what? I know it's not as maybe not as massive a thing as wondering if cops or fire engine would show up at Tuco's place when a bomb apparently went off. My thing I'm wondering is, I didn't get this. Excuse me. I didn't get to see Walt picking out that hat. Where did he get that hat? Did he go into a store? Did he have it in his closet? I don't think so. I'm just curious. It's an interesting hat. It's become an iconic hat. He just had the hat. I wouldn't think about where. I can believe he had those sunglasses, maybe. No.
Yeah.
But the hat.
What would have been a really good scene is like he goes in, like buys the hat, and then walks out, and he's like, across the street it's a furniture store that Crazy Eight's dad owns. That would be fucking cool.
That would be cool.
Yeah, maybe a bit on the nose, but I think it'd still be cool.
Yeah, I don't mind a bit. I don't mind something being on the nose if I enjoy it, and and beyond the way Jesse reacts to the hat, I love the way Jesse reacts to the spot that Walt picked for the meet. I mean, he basically says it's the kind of thing that a non-criminal would pick, something you might have seen in a movie or something. It just reminds me of how people, not here, thankfully, but in later episodes maybe, how people always choose to have secret clandestine meetings in parking garages. It's always parking garages, all the time. Whatever. Don't know. It's a thing. This picking a junkyard like that, yeah, it's such a cliche. It's kind of, of course, it's perfect because Walt. That's all Walt would know is for what he's seen in the movies and stuff like that. And we talked about Walt making bad decisions, bad choices. Walt also, and it goes hand in hand with it, Walt creates his own problems. Which I don't know if that's maybe an improvement for him, because before it always felt like he was the victim and things that happened to him, hence me calling him a schlamatzel. Here now he's actually creating his own problems. He's insisting on the money from Tuco without the product to cover it, which makes it, at least at this small juncture, that's akin to taking a loan from a shark that, could possibly shred him. And then he doubles the amount of expected product on top of that. I mean, it's kind of, it's a little bit crazy, but then based on the very next scene and the conversation that he's having with Jesse, apparently Walt does have a plan, so that's why he wanted to double the amount of product. But it's the fact that once again he doesn't consult with his partner, especially before they meet with someone like Tuco. It makes me think of the way Mike describes Walt a few seasons from now, and why he doesn't trust him, why he doesn't think Walt is not a safe bet for him. I don't know how else to put it. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, he's a bad credit risk.
Yeah, and it just, I think from this point on, for the decisions Walt makes now in Heisenberg mode, it's apropos from this point on, I would say. I also suppose it's a little bit worth mentioning that in that conversation between, at least the first conversation between Walt and Jesse in the kitchen, is when we get the classic "yeah, science" line. I do love the conversation between Walt and Jesse. There's an even better one later on, I think. But let's go to something really silly, and then we're going to get to the Walt Hank moment that I was thinking of. What you were talking about earlier, I thought of with this scene that's coming up.
Yeah.
Is it? Oh, it's her shower, right? It's that's right. It's Skylar's baby shower. You know how we keep mentioning little things that we forgot about? I had no recollection that Walt Jr. was basically video recording a woman's cleavage there. I did not remember that. And that, Walt Jr.'s a little bit of a lecherous bastard. Hey, way to go, kid. But it's in that scene we get this conversation between Walt and Hank outside. That's a very interesting conversation, I thought, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because it's almost, I'm not going to go as far as, it's not like they're marking their territory, but the fact that they're talking about a very major difference of opinion, which is really going to be something that we'll see play out, most literally play out a few seasons from now, because they're talking about what is legal now, what may be legal in the future, what should be permissible, what shouldn't be, whatever. And obviously, Hank's a DEA agent, and he's not exactly a bleeding heart liberal either, for that matter. There's no way he's going to be pro any. Look at the way they. Oh, by the way, the way they talk about marijuana throughout this season, I think, makes every pot smoker crack up, because they treat it like it's the most evil, horrible thing in the world. And I wonder if they had come up with Breaking Bad today. Well, obviously, if they did today, because it's legal in so many places, they wouldn't. But even like 5 years later, if they would still have played those scenes out the same way, because they're like super conservative about it. I know that area of the country is also a more conservative area, and you can attest that you've been there a number of times. But it's almost like it's borderline reefer madness, levels, the way they react to pot,
And New Mexico is fairly liberal and pretty solidly blue, especially in the larger cities. But these people being associated with the DEA, they probably all have a natural bias against it, because law enforcement tends to whatever, and this is specifically drug-related law enforcement. So,
you know how dumb I can be. For some reason, obviously it's New Mexico, it's Albuquerque, New Mexico, whatever. But when I was saying that, my brain was in Arizona, and that's what I was thinking. I'm not smart, but
desert.
desert communities, and whatever. But it's those differences in their views I think it's just more foreshadowing of what's going to happen. Let's say about a year from now. So here we are going to get a moment a little bit later on. I don't know if I wouldn't exactly call it a first, because Walt's been spitting lies for the entire season already. But now, at least he's lying in advance. It's when he tells Skylar he's going to go to a sweat lodge for the weekend, when obviously we know he's going to do a big cook. And I guess it kind of stands out to me because I remember something very similar to that happened in the following season. I think it's in 4 Days Out. I remember, it's kind of a thing that he does. He makes up this elaborate excuse of why he'll be able to disappear for a few days. But it's when they're hatching this plan to steal the methylamine. It's basically another Breaking Bad trope thing we see we've seen it a few times in this season. It's classes in session. It's Walt and Jesse, teacher and student. It's a lesson disguised as a scheme. you know? And when they talk about that here, and then right after that, and speaking of like tropes and first, we also get the first, I'm going to say it's the first caper that Walt and Jesse pull off together. If I don't include the cooks as that, that's just cooking meth. But these goofy, weird-ass capers, which will, some are on the goofier side, and some will end on with more tragic results. But we do see that a number of times throughout the series, if you think about it. And many times they're actually predicated, or preceded and predicated by some sort of little science lesson, which is what's, why they're doing this, or how they're doing this. Either it's something involving magnets, or being able to pull off a train robbery, or whatever, or even convincing a shyster lawyer to make anyway. wait till next season. But those ski masks, they're just perfect. They should have shown him buying those. No, he already had the Heisenberg hat at that point. No, it wouldn't have made sense. There should just be a fun hat store somewhere in New Mexico that Walter goes to all the time. That's where he got the Heisenberg hat. That's where he got anyway. All right. So, but again, I don't know if I want to bother calling that the first caper, but I also point out it's the first of many barrel-related moments on this series. Barrels play a big part on this series. It's interesting. Okay, it's not really interesting, but I'm finding it anyway. Now, the whole situation with the open house while they're cooking in the basement, along with a few other things that happen over the course of the season, it's that things that might be a little bit darker, like the acid melting the bathtub, things of that nature. Now that we're in the end of the whole season, you're looking back on that in this specific episode. You come to realize how I talked about how they like to inject humor on the show. I really should point out it's not just that they inject humor on the show; it's very dark humor. It's a very, I guess we would call it, it's a very darkly comic show throughout the course of the series.
Yes.
I mean, I guess it comes in handy when you do have a lead who has a pretty extensive comedy background of his own, but it's one of those things you realize, there's a lot of that throughout this show. I think I said that earlier, so I don't know why I'm repeating myself, so I apologize. But speaking of things that are comical, and this goes to what you were saying earlier about Marie, we come back to her, and again, it's funny how the most judgmental, holier-than-thou person on the show is, in fact, a kleptomaniac, apparently. And it's what leads me to that little conversation between Walt and Skyler when they're both just relaxing on the couch. I think that's the scene where she tells him about Marie stealing that tiara. And then in this really kind of, I'm going to say kind of a ham-fisted sort of way, it's inelegant at best. Walt tries to feel her out as far as how she would react if he did something, like that. Of course, the way he phrases it, I'm surprised Skylar didn't respond, wait, what if you stole a tiara to help your family? Which doesn't make any sense. Obviously, that's not what he means, but again, it's this weird little thing of him, he's testing the waters. He's like, let's see how this would go over. And it just reminds me of just little things he says, with her, and then little situations with Hank. It's just him just like pushing just a little teeny tiny bit, even though he's not about to reveal anything. But I think it's also this part of him that wants to,
Yeah, he wants to be able to unburden himself, but in a way, but also he wants somebody else to help him justify his own crap, because not that he's not good at doing them, but I'm sure getting some validation that it's okay to do that. It's kind of what that kind of person likes to do too.
Right, absolutely, exactly. And of course, now lead us pretty much to the final scene of the episode, and which, of course, kicks off with the immortal "tight, tight, tight." And also, I should point out, Walt, I think, has completed the iconic Heisenberg look at this point, because he's switched his more khaki color jacket for a black one. So he's got the whole thing going. He's got the sunglasses, the hat, the jacket, bing, bang, boom, that's Heisenberg. And then comes the moment that was pretty shocking when we all first saw it.
What is this shit? This is blue.
We use a different chemical process, but it is every bit as pure.
Maybe blue, but it's the bomb.
Tight, yeah! Blue, yellow, pink. Whatever, man, just keep bringing me that.
4.6.
Come on. And what did I say, man? This guy can cook. You're all right, man. You're all right. We're gonna make a lot of money together.
Just remember who you're working for.
What did you say?
I'm just saying, they gotta know that they're working for you.
Like they don't already know that? Are you saying that they're stupid?
Nah, I'm just saying.
Okay, so you're not saying that they're stupid. So I don't understand. Are you saying that I'm stupid?
Nah, come on, Tuco, I'm just saying.
No, you're just speaking for me. Like I ain't got the goddamn sense to speak for myself. Is that it? Is that what you're doing?
Tuco. Hey, why don't we all just relax, huh?
Heisenberg says, relax. Orale, Holmes. I'm relaxed. Whoa! Damn, man, look at that, look! Whew! That's messed up. Okay, Heisenberg! Next week.
Actually, the way that scene plays, to a slight extent, they could have titled this episode, instead of taking the title from Fargo, they could have titled it, taken the title from Goodfellas. Because that whole exchange with Tuco saying, do you think they're stupid? Wait, do you think that I'm stupid? It's just a little reminiscent of the, do you think I'm funny? Like a clown kind of funny kind of exchange, except it ends in a much worse way. And this is where I want to address the Jesse Pinkman thing that we mentioned earlier. The whole, they were originally planning to kill Jesse Pinkman off thing. Now, apparently when they were first writing the show, early on, the original idea was to have Tuco beat Jesse to death here instead of No-Dose. And obviously that is not what they ended up doing. I'm actually gonna skip to me talking about this. There's something I kind of want to explain about that, because people keep talking about this whenever they talk about the show, that Jesse was going to get killed off. Jesse was going to be killed off. All right, so to address that, if you look at the whole first season as a whole, bear in mind, this was originally supposed to be a 9-episode season. When the first half of the season was being filmed, there was a writer's strike that halted production for 4 months. During that time, AMC informed Gilligan, etc., that they were cutting back their order of episodes from 9 to 7 episodes. At that point, Vince Gilligan, he had to reevaluate how they were going to originally end the season. Now, yeah, I mentioned that there was that original plan to kill Jesse. That plan was actually scrapped before the cutback in episodes and strike happened. They had made that decision not to do that well before that. However, there was a definite plan to kill Hank off at the end of the season. That was the intention that they were going to do with the original 9-episode order until that forced break, and they cut the episodes back. Those 2 episodes that had been written, they got tossed out, and they got rewritten to be the first 2 of the following season, in which Hank obviously doesn't die. He's just obviously greatly impacted by the events we'll be talking about on our next podcast about Breaking Bad. But the original plan was to be that Hank did not survive that encounter. Hank is killed off at the end of season 1. Now, if you think about how much the show might have lost if they had gone in that direction, considering the really powerful arc that Hank goes through, throughout the course of the series, the 1-minute episode, etc., everything in that 5th season, the strike and the cutback in episodes actually ended up being kind of a blessing for the series. So I just think it's interesting because I've heard people when they get into people think I shouldn't say they think, that sounds a little pompous. Other people who know a lot about the show, that often will come up in conversation about Jesse. Oh, can you believe they were going to get rid of Jesse? And then they changed their mind. And I said, yeah, but they kind of changed their mind about that really early. That wasn't as opposed to the Hank decision, which was planned until they made that decision. And they literally threw away 2 scripts, the last of which ended with Hank being killed off. I just think that's kind of an interesting thing to point out, so I just want to point out. And I'm sure Dean Norris is very happy they made that change.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, I mean, at the end of the episode, already meant that is the end of the episode. Obviously, it picks right back up in the beginning of the next season, but we'll talk about that when we talk about the next season. I do like the fact they have CeeLo Green singing "Who's Gonna Save My Soul" at the end, but again, I love the choices of music on this show overall. So that's pretty much it for that final episode. So, I mean, I wouldn't mind taking a few moments just to look back and any comments about the season overall. And anything that maybe you wanted to get in there and talk about yourself there, Mr. Dan.
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much covered everything that, I didn't have written down or stuff like that. So, but it definitely was a good season. Really, really strong first season. And definitely, you see there isn't a lot to not like about it. And you definitely see the stuff that's good. That's the seeds of the things that are going to become great.
Right.
That's pretty clear.
Yeah. And also, it's really hard to compare it to the others for a number of reasons. I mean, not the least of which is it's only 7 episodes. So there's that. Look, I doubt most people or most anybody picks the first season of Breaking Bad as their favorite. But a lot of it, that you've picked up on from me mentioning all the first times we meet this one or that thing or that theme or that trope, whatever. The season is, as you were saying, it's about laying the foundation. It's laying the groundwork for the characters we're going to be following, and maybe we're going to hopefully get emotionally invested in them for the duration of the series. It's, like you said, it's laying the seeds or planting the seeds for all these storylines that are going to come to fruition in the following season and future seasons as well. I mean, when you put Breaking Bad up with the other heavy hitters that are always in, the greatest TV drama of all time kind of conversations, which tends to be like The Sopranos and The Wire, one could stretch it to maybe a Mad Men or Game of Thrones or one of those kind of shows, but it's usually Breaking Bad, Sopranos, and The Wire more than anyone else. I know, and I'm referring to the first season of it. I'm sorry, just to be clear. It probably falls a little short, and maybe that is due to just being 7 episodes, or maybe it's due to that it doesn't tell as big an overarching story in its first season as much as it does in the following 4 seasons. But it's still really good, and the 4 seasons. I should have a music clip in there now. Depend on this season. So it truly is the foundation for everything that's going to come after it, I think. If that
Yes. Yeah, totally.
Anyway. Okay. So I realized between all these separate recordings, oh Lord, this is going to be a 3-hour thing. All right, so let me start to wrap this thing up. So 3 weeks or so from now, I'm going to have that little caveat because, past couple of years have really shown us anything can happen, that good or bad, that can delay things. But right now, we're tentatively saying the next Breaking Bad podcast will be released on August 27th. And that will be when we're covering the first half of Breaking Bad Season 2. Obviously, it's a 13-episode season, so I believe we're going to cover the first 7 episodes, and the one that comes after that will cover 6, which will also then feature us talking about the season as a whole, so it should balance out somewhat that way, hopefully. So that's it. Also, if anyone wants to be silly and try to track down my top 25 episodes of Breaking Bad, that piece I wrote a million years ago, you know what? Just Google Breaking Bad 25 esoteric candy. I'm positive it's the very first link that'll show up, so it'll be there. I can post it on our Facebook page too, but I think I've done that a bunch of times. It looks a little too self-aggrandizing for me to keep doing it. So I'll just mention it on the podcast instead.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing wrong with that, of course.
No, totally.
No, well, of course, it's totally legit. All right. So if you enjoyed this podcast, and I really hope you did, and if we seem or sound like we're a little tired, we are.
Yeah.
I only had a little bit of sleep and had to work the whole day and everything. Were you doing more of your whitewater rapid stuff today or whatever?
No, I just did a crap ton. I was going for all day yesterday, and today I did a bunch of stuff, but I'm still kind of tired out. But
oh yeah, well, it's
bring the classic STDV podcast talking about stuff. I mean, we didn't get around to half an hour of deciding what color Swiss cheese is, but we still did okay tonight, I think.
Wow, I can remember that somehow. Color Swiss cheese. Okay, I'm going to think about that because I really do remember. Oh, I totally remember that. Yeah. Oh, that was so stupid. All right. Anyway, we don't need to add extra minutes to this podcast. I'm positive it's going to be over 3 hours. If you enjoy this podcast, even if it took you a week to listen to it, you will enjoy hanging out on our Facebook page. Come find us, the Serious TV Drama Podcast page. Like the page and join the conversation about shows. Hey, like Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, or so many others. You can really much find this podcast, what's the phrase? Wherever podcasts are found, we'll be there. Your Spotify's, your Apple Podcast, iTunes, and so on. And some of them give you a chance to rate and review us. Please do. I haven't checked those things in over a year, so I don't even know if anyone's ever rated and reviewed us anymore. More importantly to me, personally, you can now follow us on Instagram. Please follow us on Instagram. Please make this endeavor worthwhile for me. I'm spending some time here. On Instagram, you can find us there. It's simply Serious TV Drama, as one word. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is @STVD Podcast. That's STVD as in Serious TV Drama. Did I leave something out? I did. You can find all of our podcasts, all 319 of them, on stvdpodcast.podbean.com. I forgot to mention it, but now I did. So that's pretty much it. We will definitely see you in at least 3 weeks with the next Breaking Bad podcast, and I'll send you guys out a reminder on the Facebook and on the Twitter and Instagram and elsewhere. Could there be another podcast between now and then? It's entirely possible. I'm not going to guarantee anything, but there's a couple things that are on my radar. If you feel like it. It could be about certain TV shows that might be on between now and then. It could be about a certain movie that got released today. We'll see. But we'll keep it. I don't know if we'll have time, so it's a possibility. That's fair.
Right. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah. There you go. I think I'm sure Jason is texting me right now. You were texting me earlier, and it's oh, by the way, what's it? It's okay. Oh, is it on HBO Max? No, that's great. I'm not gonna have time to watch it till Saturday unless I go to see it in the theater. And he started sending me things. It's you know what? Just make sure you don't spoil me on it, dude. He's telling me, there's end credit scenes. I know. There's gonna be 2 end credit scenes. I got it. All right, shh, quiet, Jason. Anyway, Dan, thank you for staying up through this marathon. I know it can be a bit arduous, but it is what it is. I'm going to collapse. I'm going to have to do all the editing about this tomorrow. It's already 2 a.m. here, and my eyes are bleary as hell. So we'll get this out sometime Friday afternoon, I think. All right. So good night to all you people out there, and good night, Dan, and you can do the final good nights, I guess.
Good night.